To start, Carlos?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll call the City of Olivet Planning and Community Design Commission for September 3rd, 2020 to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Rob Jurgel,
Present.
Carol Wagner,
Present.
Jody Rich here. Richard Brophy,
Present.
Brian Lewis,
Present.
Michael Saunders,
Present.
and Tim Spiegelglass.
Present.
Let it also be known that City Council Liaison Missy Waldman's in attendance, as well as Staff Liaison Carlos Trejo, the Director of Planning and Community Development, Jonathan Roper, the Planner GIS Coordinator, as well as Bridget Walters, the Administrative Assistant for all of that. Okay, Carlos, I think the first item on the agenda is the election of officers. And, you know, I don't remember the specific procedures, how we do it as far as nominations go, but I do want, if somebody wants to be in a position, I think let it be known so we can make sure that, you know, that person gets nominated. And if someone doesn't want to be in a role, you know, let it be known too, because we'd hate to nominate somebody for a position they don't want to be in. So, okay, Carlos, what
I
are
think we traditionally start with there are three officers that are noted in the section of the municipal code regarding the Planning and Community Design Commission. That is the chair, the vice chair, and secretary. I would recommend, and I think what we traditionally done is somebody to motion for to nominate somebody to serve as chair. There could be, of course, multiple nominations. That nomination needs to be seconded, and if it's unopposed, it will go to a vote. If it is opposed, it'll go to a vote between the two or three.
Okay. So do I call that or just leave it up for people? We'll start it out for chairman.
I would recommend you call out for for somebody to nominate for chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Michael.
I move that we remove the word acting in front of your name for chairman. We remove the word acting in front of Carol's name for vice chairman. And sorry, Jody, but we remove the word acting in front of your name for secretary.
I will second that.
That
Motion.
was seconded by Mr. Brophy, correct?
Correct.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So do we vote on that, or do we want to, you know, I think if there's anybody else that would like to, you know, to be considered for one of those, I think we should have the opportunity before we just go ahead and bring that to a vote. I appreciate the efficiency, Mike, you know, to make sure this doesn't go to 10:30, but so is anybody else, are there any other nominations? I don't see any. So any further discussion? So I guess we call for a vote.
Yes. I'll go ahead. Commissioner Spiegelglass?
Yes.
Commissioner Saunders?
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis?
Yes.
Commissioner Brophy?
Yes.
And that would be the majority. The other three, of course, are part of that motion, so I don't.
Sorry, Jody.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Well, thanks everybody for, I think we have a good leadership with everybody here, and appreciate all the support. So thank you. And so I guess we'll move on to, you know, Carlos, do we have any public comments at this point in time that are not related to the agenda item?
None that have been received, sir.
Okay. So as part of these,
Chair?
Yes.
And I'm not sure if it's just me or so, but you do sound a little faint. We can hear you clearly, but it's not as loud as some of the others.
Okay, let me see if I can adjust it. Is this better? No? How is this?
That's good.
Okay.
Okay, good, good, good. Sorry about that. Okay, so before we start into old business, just kind of wanted to review the procedures, especially for the participants that might be watching in the audience. I think we're getting better with the Zoom meetings, but there will always be troubles or problems that we have to address as we go. So be patient with us as we go. If you do have a comment related to a particular item on the agenda, there's a place to add comments down below in the Q&A. So if you can just list the comment there. And if you already have a comment that you want to present for a particular item, go ahead and type that in just to make sure, we don't bypass it or go too fast. Okay, we'll give some time as we go to, as part of this, but the normal procedures are as Carlos will give a report on a particular item. There'll be discussions amongst the board members. And then we'll probably bring on one of, a member of who's presenting or requesting the review to have, answer questions. At that point in time, then we'll also ask for questions from the public regarding a particular item. If it's just a general comment, we will go over those at the very end. So, but, so go ahead and include that if it's a general comment as well. Okay. We'll move on to old business. This is item A, old business, the Old Bonham Elementary School at 9661 Old Bonham Road. The petition type is a community design site plan and concept stormwater management plan review for an addition and site alterations to the existing school. The petitioner is Rick Keskeler, VP and project manager for Ittner Architects. The property owner is the school district of the city of Ladue. Carlos?
Chairman, I'm going to kind of summarize the contents in the staff report that was published in the September 3rd agenda. This property, of course, this petition was introduced to the commission early August in their first meeting for discussion, and then formally introduced at our meeting on August 20th. For the first review and presentation by the petitioner and possibility for action. There was a couple of questions that were going to be addressed that we've received some revisions, but in a real quick summary, the property is zoned PA Public Activity District, and under our PA Public Activity District, a school, whether public or private, is a permitted use by right, meaning they have the rights for the development and use of the property for school purposes. However, it is subject to what we call site plan review. And anything that goes through a review through the commission also has a community design review element and a stormwater management plan review element. And that's why we've noted those as part of the petition description and title. The petition, the school is proposing to renovate the existing building, provide 2 additions to the existing building, and do some various site improvements that are identified in your report and in part of the petition application. Note that they did have a project report that was part of your packet that was submitted early on in August. Under site plan review, the core process of site plan review is to demonstrate all reasonable steps have been taken to minimize negative effects upon the site itself and the surrounding properties. Again, the project here includes a renovation, an addition, and some various site improvements on there. And when we do a site plan review, the code calls out that we should be, a special focus should be paid towards utility and drainage, buffering, parking, traffic, noise, pedestrian convenience, landscaping, and open spaces, signs, and impact on public expenditures. We also have, of course, our guiding document for our commission, which is our strategic plan adopted in 2006. While it focuses on the Olive Boulevard corridor and the 4 industrial parks, it does provide us some guidance in terms of how we should be reviewing any project that comes before the commission in there. And there's 4 focus areas in that: our community identity, economic development, transportation connections, and open spaces. And a lot of these are get blended into how we conduct that site plan review. That strategic plan gives us some guidance, and the site plan review gives us a little bit more specifics to the process. Of course, the city has various other plans. However, they don't necessarily impact this site, whether it's the Catalyst strategy or the Olive Boulevard Corridor Management Plan in there. But we do take into account to some of those elements and in there. So when we conducted the review for this, again, based on our site plan review standards, we primarily focused on stormwater, the transportation connections, landscaping and open space, and then the building aesthetics in general. We had discussion at our last meeting that in which we talked about some of the grading on the site and the rear. The modifications were made by the petitioner, as you see on the slide, where they extended a swell along the east property line. Northward talked about maybe a little berm going a little bit further north. On the north side, the concerns, there was a lot of discussion regarding the topography there and the slope and the grading along there. For the most part, there wasn't a real quick solution in there, but they did explain what steps in the plan design were taken to try to minimize any, of increasing any impact that those properties would have. And that's more specific when you look at some of the cross sections, and we'll go through those later, where you'll see, all the building improvements and all the site improvements are kind of channeled and placed into the two biodetention basins that are going to be provided on the site. So it minimizes the amount of surface flow of those improvements. And then those areas that we kind of talked about on the northeast corner of the site grounds, hoping my little mouse hand shows right here. You'll see in the cross sections how it's mostly pervious area, whether it's grass playground or so, and there's quite a bit of space for the stormwater to either filter and slow down and ultimately hopefully get resolved in there. But we still recognize that there are some steep slope conditions along here, and would like any opportunity to continue to try to address and work on those items. Regarding connections, both connections and pedestrian and open space and landscaping. We talked at our last meeting what was incorporated into the site plan, where there's a hierarchy to the sidewalks. They were increasing the width on two components on the sidewalk. One as you enter the site from the east, the other when you enter the site from the north, that they would have a wider sidewalk. And then when that sidewalk provides an opportunity to continue either parallel with Old Bonham Road or to go into the main entry gate area, the sidewalk then, the width of the sidewalk does get reduced to what its current conditions are. They talked about some of the landscaping that would be incorporated by the new parking area there at the east corner of the site, and then how it would be used in the transition area between those where the sidewalk splits on the east side, and then also on that west elevation, which we'll talk about later. And then landscaping that was incorporated where the generator and the utility, there's another utility equipment that's located here that serves the shelter. Going back to stormwater, and these may be a little bit difficult to read because they are pretty extensive, but they actually are pretty good in terms of providing the information on the site. The one thing I'll note, on the east side of the site, you can see that the expanded parking area is actually on a elevated plane with a retaining wall within the residential properties here. So all this area, all this surface area of the parking lot is being caught by the wall and being redirected to those basins that are placed, one on the east and of course one on the north on that side. So the surface impact really is kind of limited to what's in the buffer area and everything outside on the retaining wall. Now, as you go further down from this cross section, you'll start seeing the basin, and then that basin will have a swell to pick up areas further to the north. Kind of trying to take a look at the opposite end of that. So if you were looking from Lindley and looking south, you would see that surface parking area here way in the background, because Old Bottom's going to be on the other side. But you can see how much surface area there is from the improvements that lead to the property lines. And then you can see the biodetention swell here along the back. And then kind of looking at the area that we kind of expressed some concern at that northeast corner, you could see the amount of impervious space that heads back there to where that playground equipment is. All these building improvements here and all that, of course, are being channeled through different piping systems and heading to the bio detention basin. So most of this space is grass, is field area. So again, I'm going to go back to the site plan. So what you saw back here in where the parking area is, all this parking area, there's actually a retaining wall that kind of runs along the edges here. And that retaining wall captures the volumes of that water area, leading it to this basin. Then we kind of looked at the back, and you saw how that the extent of green space and field space that are the two other through these two other cross sections. So I hope that makes sense. I'd be glad to. I know that kind of goes fast, and hopefully that if there's any questions I can answer on that, I'll do so now, or else I'll continue.
I don't have any questions. Does anybody else? If you do, feel free to speak, since I can't see everybody at the same time.
The other aspects, and then Chairman, I can continue. The other aspects that we discussed was
Yes.
regarding the building elevations, and we did express concern about the west elevation along Old Bottom. But real quickly, to kind of explain, starting from the upper left-hand corner, this elevation represents the elevation that currently is the primary entrance to the school, where we have the long canopy. That canopy will be replaced and redesigned, but you'll have a canopy that extends along that distance where the horseshoe is at. This elevation represents the back end of the two-level area. So you can see the parking garage here, excuse me, not parking garage, but the retaining wall with the parking surface up on the top, so Old Bottom's on the opposite side. And then this elevation represents the area from, if you were directly across from Stacy Park looking southward, this is the new storm shelter. And then this is the extension areas off of the storm shelter, which I'll address in a second. One of the concerns we expressed was on this elevation here on the lower left-hand corner. If you look at the elevation looking directly west, it's nearly 100 feet, and it consists of primarily the storm shelter, and then it has some mass projections that extend out. And we expressed some concern that the length of that one-story segment just didn't have quite a bit of articulation. They did take that back and had discussions with the school, and they've looked at a couple of options. These that you see here on your right hand, the two on the right-hand side represent, understanding the city's concerns and looking at methods of trying to break that plane up and give it some articulation in the process. So Chairman, again, that kind of covers the site plan review process that staff initiated through that staff report. Be glad to answer any specific questions. I do know we have several representatives with the school.
Carlos, I just have one question, and it's in that upper right-hand figure, where it says the length is nearly 100 feet. If you go down to just the lower right, or there's looks like a series of windows. Is that what it is? On that second level?
Just up here?
Yes, correct.
Yes, that's this. If you go leftward, that's this elevation right here.
Okay, on an angle.
Correct.
Okay, good. I just wanted to verify that. So,
Chairman?
Go ahead, Carol.
I'm having computer issues. I'm gonna have to leave the meeting and try and come back in again.
Okay. Do you want us to pause, or I think we should continue on?
I think you should continue on.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yeah, but we won't issue a vote until we get you back. Okay.
Shouldn't take long.
Great. Thanks, Carol. Okay. If anybody has any further questions for Carlos, let's go ahead and ask. Otherwise, let's go ahead and bring in the representative.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mike. I do have a question.
Go ahead, Mike.
Carlos, the retaining wall that is on the east side of the parking lot abutting the residential neighborhood, how tall is that retaining wall? Do we
Bear
know?
with me 1 second. Yeah, I don't have the exact number, but I'll get that in the plan set. 1 second, Michael.
And while you're looking at it, because I think the section looked like it was fairly tall. Are we doing anything to sort of soften the impact to the adjacent neighborhood? And that might be a question for the applicants. So.
I think I'd like to know about the fence that's going up on top of that too. I think is a good question with that as well.
Yeah, it's good. Great point. Thank you. Great point.
Chairman, if I can go ahead and just bring in Mr. Keisker with Intner Architects, he probably can address both those questions a little quicker.
Yeah, that'd be
than I
great.
can.
Let's do that.
Right.
We also have a guardrail on by the northwest side too.
Okay, Chairman, I've transferred Rick Keisker with Intner Engineering. He is the Vice President and Project Manager with Intner Architects.
Hi, Rick.
All right.
Thanks for being on.
Thank-
If you might be able to address some of those questions, that'd be great.
Yeah, first I just want to say good evening and I want to thank you guys again for meeting. This is our third meeting, as Carlos mentioned, and we really enjoy working with Carlos and Jonathan and meeting with you to go over the project again. So to answer your the question, I guess yes, there will be a guardrail on top of that wall there. It's going to meet code. It's going to be at least 42 inches. And we haven't selected an exact railing for that yet, but there will be a guardrail on top of that wall there. Is there the plan is those trees that you see there, we would keep those trees, and if for some reason building the wall, those had to be removed, we definitely replace each tree that needed to be removed to build that wall.
How high is that wall?
Let me see if I can try it. I was trying to look that up right before you got me on here.
Okay.
Looks like it's about, well, at the cut that I'm looking at, it looks like it's about 5 feet.
And how are you proposing to finish that wall? Is it just going to be raw concrete, or is
It could be a modular block retaining wall, which you probably seen around. I think there might even be one on the site right now. The other option is it could be some type of a concrete wall, but if we use a concrete wall, it would have some type of a form liner on it. We've done those where they almost look like the modular block walls. There's different types you can get all kinds of things. You can make look like brick or various different designs. So right now, I don't think we've selected which method we're using. The plans do say concrete, as you can see on that note right there, but as we get into the design further, we could use a modular block wall. Could you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
Carol, if you could mute.
I need to
while-
get back to my
Just
basic.
sign out and do it.
Sorry, Rick.
No problem.
Okay, good. Now go ahead.
Yeah, did that answer the question?
yeah, and I would certainly advocate for, something other than just a new concrete retaining.
Yeah, we definitely wouldn't just put a blank concrete wall there. If it is concrete, as noted on the plan there, it would have some kind of treatment on it.
Is the plan still to use this upper parking? Now, I guess it has a dual function because I think it acts as a playground, or it's certainly set up for kids' activities. Is the plan to continue to use it also for?
I guess you could. It probably, if it is use for play surfaces, it won't be quite in the way that it's done now because it's broken up with some landscaped areas. So it's really the improvements on with this lot and some of the other improvements is really has a lot to do with improving traffic and
Right.
getting cars off the road and onto the school property and allowing more queuing during pickup and drop off times.
So are those are landscaped islands then, is what you're proposing? It says landscape islands.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussion about what that landscaping entails yet?
We haven't identified that. That could be grass, or that could be some type of low shrubs or something like that. Low landscaping.
Yeah, I don't
We
think
we
that.
do on the other landscaping plan that Carlos had up earlier. You know, we show new trees that we're putting in. This is actually an older plan. This is the original plan that was submitted before we made the upgrades. So we are adding some trees along the road there, and we had a follow-up meeting with Jonathan and Carlos last week and kind of got into more of the details on the landscaping, the sidewalks, and the stormwater management. We're probably going to move one of those trees at that right only exit just to have more visibility when someone's making a right turn off of that kind of west right only exit there.
Hey, along those lines, Carlos, in your report, you make a comment about rescinding an ordinance regarding the traffic on this east parking lot. Can you talk to us about what that entails?
Correct. A couple of years ago, or probably within the past year, the city, along with the school district, had collaborated on an access plan into the old, what is the current parking site, limiting this intersection right here that I'm circling with the little hand icon. And with that prevents, I believe, somebody from Stony Side heading due north into the site. It also prohibits somebody that's going eastbound on Old Bottom taking a left and going into the site during school operating hours or drop off and pickup times. It was adopted by the city as an ordinance, meaning that as an ordinance, somebody violating that circulation pattern could be issued a ticket.
Got it. Okay.
In the process, we did Mr. Kaiser, along with the school and the rest of the team, did sit down with the chief of police and have a discussion about getting that ordinance rescinding. Going, and that would be a council action regarding the access. And at this point, I don't see that there'll be any issue.
Yeah, I just got one last question. I'm sorry for hogging the time. I think if I remember reading in your report, where this is being overparked just slightly by what we require by code. Is that
correct? Just slightly. It was difficult to calculate the full number of classrooms of what because they have these multi-purpose spaces that have been integrated in here, whether they should count as a classroom or count as shared space. So I took those out.
okay?
So the wet lab spaces that they have, the computer room, I didn't count as a full classroom. And based on the capacity that was currently noted for the school, kind of use that as a rule of thumb of dividing how many pupils they are per teacher, that those would represent the classrooms. And that's how I got to that number.
But it does look like the total number of spaces on the site has increased. Is that correct?
That is correct.
By what?
Yeah. As an advocate of, we got way too much parking in this city. I was just hoping that maybe we could reduce some, but I assume this is all being programmed by the school district, the parking.
That's correct. And we are increasing parking on the east side there, but we're reducing some parking on the west to get the bus loop to, we do have some parking on the west and the north end of the school, but I think it's a little bit less than what exists there today on the west end. There's no changes to parking in the front.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, I mean, Carlos, you did a really good job of presenting the project and the changes. I don't know if you want to, since I think the landscaping, the sidewalks, and the stormwater management were all reviewed at the last meeting. We had a follow-up meeting with Carlos and Jonathan to go over those. The new item is really probably the west wall here that you just put up on the screen. So we have two basic designs in here. We looked at several other options. We considered other things, but considering that when you see this wall, because we looked at doing like a mural or some different things, and you're driving by this elevation and you're kind of seeing it from skewed angles. So it we didn't want to do something that was too distracting. So the two schemes we have right now, one's more horizontal, that has a horizontal band of articulation in the brick, and this one, the other one there you had up on the screen, it's got some vertical bands. And as Carlos mentioned earlier, this end of the building is a storm shelter. It's a more robust structure. Per the code, it's got to be designed to withstand a 250 mile per hour wind. And we're looking at several different structural systems for this. It could be a precast panel with thin brick. It could, or it could be like a masonry with a traditional brick finish. And so we haven't settled on exactly how the brick articulation will occur. We're looking at different things, from using different thicknesses of brick to leaving out some pieces of the brick to kind of create, and you see the precast through kind of those holes that you see there. And other options could be using a different color brick or a different texture of brick, or some combination of those kinds of things. So we're going to continue to work through the process of design, and once the storm shelter structural is settled down, we can fine tune that, and then it'll be something like one of these two options. It could be a little bit different, but it's going to be something in this kind of character of what we're showing here.
If I may, one quick question.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as the father of a 4.5-year-old, I wonder whether there's any thought put into whether children are going to climb that.
That actually was thought of. If you scroll down a little bit, I think it's page 6 on that attachment you got there. So that was actually something that was actually thought of when we were thinking about projecting bricks. And if we do them, as you can see here, it would only be we're talking about a difference between a 1/2 inch thick thin brick and a 1 inch. So it'd be very minimal type of thing. But that is, in the earlier scheme, we had projections that were coming out farther, and that was actually something we thought about, and we definitely don't want to create a situation like that.
What about just windows? I mean, I know because of the wind issues, I'm sure you'd have to put in pretty thick windows.
Yeah, if Carlos, if you don't mind, can you go back to the last slide you had up on your previous PowerPoint? I did want to point out another change. We did add more glass, and it may not be apparent when you just look at it on this elevation. But to answer your question, there are some windows in the storm shelter. We're talking about them earlier on the north and the south side of the gym. Those windows for a storm shelter are really expensive. Either you have to do a ICC 500 rated window, or you can do a regular window with a shutter inside. So you generally don't want to put a lot of windows in these storm shelters. But if you look at the image on the top right-hand page where the wall was more blank, you'll notice that the amount of glass on the far right-hand side is less. So in those two images below, we expanded the glass much more than what you see in the top image. And that room there that you see with the more glass is it's probably going to be a music room. It could be a teacher's workroom. We're kind of working on the interior layout. So we did add more glass to this elevation. It's just once you get past that line where you hit the brick, that's where you're really into the storm shelter footprint, and it's really kind of more difficult to get windows in that part of the building.
Okay. What's, where you have the open brick, what's going to be behind it?
Well, this is kind of a little bit kind of a little glitch in how these little renderings are put together. It's not really open. It'll just be that this is all thin brick over a precast concrete panel. So it'll just be, you'll see the exposed concrete. It'll just be a pattern of brick and combination of the exposed precast.
Okay.
Is it possible, instead of having an actual physical articulation, to just use different colored bricks to create a pattern?
That is definitely an option. And Yeah, honestly, doing different colored or a different texture is probably simpler and cheaper. So I don't know if we may end up that way. Our designers like the idea of the different leaving it out or having a different thickness, but we have to do some more research with these precast panels. There's some limitations on what you can do with that type of design.
This is Mike. I would advocate for the vertical pattern versus the horizontal. It's already a pretty strong horizontal, and I think the vertical adds a little bit of interest to it and breaks up that.
I personally, I mean, that'll be, this ultimately has to be, obviously, the owners looked at this and they're okay with presenting these, but obviously they'll have a final say on this. But yeah, I agree with you. I do like that vertical layout there.
I agree. I think that looks nice.
So with approving this, can we approve it without knowing some of these details? I would think we'd want to know some of these details before we give it full approval. Carlos?
It depends to the extent of how much of the detail the commission would prefer, and also that that once those, it could be an approval based, like, let's say, like if it's regarding this this wall, and the commission, there may be other things the commission wants to consider, but I'm just going to pretend that it's specifically about this wall, that once that final decision is, that it just come back to the commission for consent.
Yeah, I can say from the owners and our side, we were hoping that you guys could approve this tonight, as with these being the general options we're looking at. And like as I mentioned when I talked to Carlos earlier today, we're definitely happy to as soon as we know, as soon as this is more refined, we can share that elevation for review at that point.
I think I'd be okay with that. How does everybody else feel?
I would agree. Yeah, I think we've done that in the past, Rob, for even some houses where we weren't sure about siding and they had to come back. So
Right.
I think in this particular case, I'd be okay with that. I certainly would yield to the other commissioners' opinions, though. So.
Does anybody
Look,
else have
Carol,
any
I think Carol
thoughts?
wants to say something.
Chairman, I'd be fine with it.
Okay, great.
I think we should be okay with it, but I think we should put on that retaining wall and that fence on there too as well, to make sure we're looking at that too.
I think that makes sense. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions or comments?
Well, speaking of fence, every time we go by Old Bonham and that parking lot that exists there now, there's it's more than a 6, an 8 or 10 foot chain link fence that's right along Old Bonham, I think.
Right.
What is the plans for that?
I think that fence will probably be removed. It doesn't really work. I mean, I think the reason that fence is there now, you see the basketball hoops, and it's kind of used more as a playground. There may be some play activities that happen on this surface, but it's probably not going to be to the degree that they do now.
Has there been any discussion about what would there be any fencing along the lot, or has that been discussed at all?
We have not discussed that.
Okay.
I mean, we do have the wall, the retaining wall we were just talking about on the east, and that railing, so that kind of offers us some a buffer or a boundary, if you will, on that east edge of the parking lot.
Yeah.
Okay. What about maybe like a low brick wall or something like that? I'm mindful that, if kids are out there playing kickball and there's nothing, the ball's going to go right out into Old Bonham Road. So I think having something there is a good idea.
That is something we talked about with Carlos. At this time, I can't say that we would propose to do that, but that is an interesting idea, and it's something we're going to look at as we kind of move forward into design.
I guess my final thought on this is I know there's been a lot of effort put into the olive corridor and setting policies for the kind of a stylistic approach for that road, making sure that it's built up properly with appropriate landscaping and stonescaping and things like that. And I frankly kind of view this as a similar issue. It's a pretty long stretch of Old Bonham, and it seems like we as the PCDC should impose some guidelines or rules about, if it's going to be redone, what that's going to look like.
Are you talking about for the entire perimeter or just for in front of this parking lot?
Well, I think perimeter in general, yes, but specifically, I think an area of increased concern is that parking lot.
Yeah, that is something that we talked about with Jonathan and Carlos, and these improvements were, as Carlos mentioned earlier, we're moving the sidewalk farther off the road. That was kind of a safety concern. We're adding the landscaping, and we're doing that on the west side of the building as well. So we responded to those comments, and I think we've included what was requested. And we'll continue to kind of make some tweaks and enhancement as we go through the additional improvement process for permits.
And I don't mean any of my comments to be pejorative in any way. I think this looks great. I'm just, mindful of a couple little areas where maybe we want to tweak and beautify a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Aaron,
Carlos?
before continuing to the public comments, if Mr. Keister can kind of address what is the schedule? Because I'm sure that there could be some inquiries or try to get an idea prior.
Yeah, we're moving through design right now, and if everything goes well, the earliest that the construction could start on this project would be next summer, and this could be a 1.5 to 2 year project with the different phases, completing sometime in 2013. There'd be a bond issue next April, and this 2020 has been kind of a different year, so that's always subject to change. But that's the current plan that we're moving forward with right now.
So the funding is so the actuality is so dependent on that bond issue.
That's not necessarily true. That's to be determined, I guess you would say.
Are there other plans for other schools too? That's going to be part of the bond issue?
Yes, so we're working on 2 other schools as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carlos, are there any other public comments related to this?
I'm switching to the 3 attendees that are in there. There are no hands raised. If anybody would like to comment or ask a question regarding this petition, if you can raise your hand. Chairman, I see none.
Okay, great. If there's no other questions or comments, do I hear any suggested motions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mike.
I'll make a motion to approve the petition for site plan review, community design review, and concept stormwater management plan review for the proposed interior renovation, addition, and site plan improvements to Old Bonham Elementary School, addressed as 9661 Old Bonham Road, as presented and noted within the memorandum from the Department of Planning and Community Development dated September 3rd, 2020, subject to any staff conditions noted herein, subject to the review of the final design of the west elevation. Is that right?
Correct.
And the retaining wall and guardrail design at the east parking lot. And Richard, I think we would like to continue that discussion about the Old Bonham edge of the parking too, and see what those plans are at some point in time. I think you raised some really good points. So I'd like to make those 3 conditions to the motion.
I'll second that motion.
Motion's been made by Michael Saunders and seconded by Richard Brophy. Carlos, will you please call the vote?
Commissioner Spiegelglass,
Approved.
Commissioner Saunders,
Approved.
Commissioner Lewis,
Approved.
Commissioner Brophy,
Approved.
Commissioner Rich,
Approved.
Commissioner Wagner,
Yes.
and Commissioner Jurgell.
Approved.
And the motion passes unanimously, 7-0.
Thanks,
All right.
Rick.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to old business item B, 1 Burno Woods Lane. Petition type is a fence variation subject to a site plan review, as well as an accessory structure subject to a site plan, community design, and concept storm water management plan review. The description is a front yard fence along Price Road that extends 36 inches and flat work associated with a pool to extend maximum 5% of the authorized surface area and encroach into the front yard setback along Price Road and the side yard setback. Petitioner is Matt Ecker. Property owner is Suni and Matthew Ecker. Jonathan or Carlos?
Chairman, I'm going to allow Mr. Roper to take over this discussion. We're also going to switch to his workstation, so just bear with us 1 second.
Sounds good.
Good evening, members of the Planning Community Design Commission. My name is, of course, Jonathan Roper, the planner and GIS coordinator with the City of Olivet. This evening we have the 1 Burno Woods. We're going to treat the accessory structure and the fence as there need to be 2 separate motions, because a fence variance on its own, you can consider that without an accessory structure. But there's also the accessory piece. But technically, the fence is kind of needed. One way or another, a fence variance would be, as they suggested, needed for the pool that they're proposing. So I'm going to first go through the accessory structure and then go through the pool. Under Chapter 400 regulations of the accessory structures, those items that exceed, whether it be the area, height, or the setback, exceed the parameters as noted under Article 16. Staff does not have that authority, so that's why we bring it to the commission. And just to switch to fences real quick, site plan review is required for a fence variation, but we'll get to that secondly. And I'll come back to the site plan review for the fence aspect of it. And here you can see overall the setback. So in red you have the fence and where they want to place that. And blue, the blue line here is the front yard setback along Price Road. I'm sorry, this is a corner lot where Burno Woods has a 35-foot setback. And use my highlighting tool real quick. Burno Woods over here, which is where the front door of their house is 1 front yard, and the second front yard is actually off North Price over here. There's a 35-foot setback around here. And in looking at what they're trying to do, as far as accessory structure, we're looking at 3 different items for the commission to consider. The first is the total amount of accessory structures on site. Staff is approved by the commission to approve up to either the greater of 500% or 5% of the lot area. And they actually have gone over that. According to your staff report, the 5% for the patio area is sorry, the number was on here. Oh, there we go. 5% of the lot area is 744 square feet, and I'm sorry, 5% is 680 square feet, and they are asking for 744 square feet. Secondly, and that would just include the hardscape area. So we're talking about this patio, this whole patio area here. The second component is an accessory structure that is greater than 120 square feet should be within the setbacks of the side yard setback of the lot. On a corner lot, the lot the side yard that is opposite of the shorter distance. So the front yard that has a shorter distance from the opposite is the side. So in this case, this area is the side, or this area right here is the side. And according to their survey, they have a 12.5 foot setback. So where they want to actually put the patio that goes around the pool is encroaching about 2 feet into that side yard setback. So it maintains a 10-foot distance, but the setback is 12.5. So they're asking for permission from the commission to do that, as well as the patio also extends. The pool is just about on the front yard property line. So which pools are able to go there, but if they want a patio around it, that's going to push them out a few feet into the front yard technically. And the blue line, it highlights that front yard setback of 35 feet from Price Road. So they're actually over that front yard setback that faces Price Road just by a little bit. So they're asking for both the side yard here to go over and the front yard here to go over as well. So together we have the area, which hard surface area that exceeds 5% of the lot area, or greater 5% or 500 square feet. So that goes over by about 64 square feet. And then we also have the encroachment into the side yard and encroachment into the front yard. Staff would note, just to clarify on here, that there is existing, the existing driveway is actually well, technically it's a side entry. If you're looking at Burnerwood, it would be a rear entry, but technically it's just the side yard, it's a side entry. So their cars actually currently swing around here to the back and enter the garage from the rear. They are remodeling part of their house, and they're actually going to have a front entry driveway. So the driveway would actually, the garage would actually, the cars would actually drive up to the front here. They're going to remove part of the driveway and replace part of this area here with the pool and the patio. So as you can see on the survey that they provided, that they're going to remove part of the existing asphalt that's right here. And they're going to cut that back and put the patio and the pool at that point. Before I get into the fence, are there any questions I got to answer for the commission at this time?
I only have one question, and that's where the pool equipment is going to be. You know, the pumps and filters.
I would rather have the petitioner answer that question because it's not, yeah, I would rather have them, and they are here.
Okay.
Should I have them on or keep going at this point?
No, we can keep going.
Okay.
Richard, I think you had a question.
Just very quickly, is there going to be a new garage?
The garage, they would actually enter from the front here. So yes, they, so currently, this is actually like a solid wall. They would actually have a new door here on the front side.
And then close off the rear, right?
I believe they are closing off the rear, yes, and adding an actual wall there at this point. So this one would have a wall, and that would actually be the door.
Okay.
Jonathan, I'm looking at Verna Woods. It looks like they would be the only house on that street with a front-facing garage. Is that right?
To my look of just a quick drive-by, I believe that is correct.
I'm driving by virtually right now.
Okay. Most of them have either, I think it's a rear entry for most of them, or maybe a side entry.
Is this a pre-manufactured pool or an in-ground pool?
It's a in-ground pool.
Anybody else have any questions or comments at this point?
And I'll just note real quickly with the garage, the reason that staff didn't bring it up, as they aren't traditionally, unless the garage were, you can add on to the house. So they actually are adding on to the house, like in the back here, 218 square feet right here in the back. As those between that and the other one fits underneath a threshold, also, you know, protection in the back or technically the side, I mean, that would be in line with other buildings, and it's in line with the setbacks. Regarding the garage, as it's not being extended or projecting out of the house, so although it might be the first front entry garage, it's not projecting any more so than the house at this point. But if they were, let's say, adding on a few feet to the front and making it project more and more noticeable, then that probably might have been a commission item just based on that type of change.
Is that for slicing, Jonathan? Is if it's front facing but not extending beyond the regular planar surface of the front of the house?
So
review as opposed to staff approval.
So in chapter 425, and I'm going to bring up the code just so we can all look at it. Just give me 1 second. Chapter 425, community design in general. It does talk, so relatively speaking, these are the items that would come before the commission. So on the lot, they would not be doing an addition that they're adding more than 400 square feet for one. Any building exterior material finish that is not identified as acceptable, accessory structures, as article that we're noting, and the other ones are commercial and the other ones. I will then go to the Olivet guidelines. So we do have the addition. Again, they're not adding on. I mean, they are changing the elevation, but they're not adding on. So we will look between that one or the design for the garage. It's not a protruding garage at that point. So that was really more the main item, is they're not adding on even to the side. They're not adding on even to the side of the house. So they're not adding more square footage for the garage. If they were coming in and they added literally 400 square feet of garage next to the house, that might be one thing, but they're literally not changing that area, and it's not being a protruding garage. And that,
I mean, with this page, we have two conditions that are discouraged, right? Protruding garages and front entry. So if it's not protruding, I definitely agree with you on that. But if it's a front entry, isn't that something that we should be looking at? I realize this is kind of a weird circumstance where they're in a position where they have the option of just moving the door from the back to the front, which is probably fairly rare. But as you look down the street, it seems as though most of the other houses on the street could do the same thing. I'm just wondering whether we're going to be in a position to scrutinize those decisions going forward, or if it's going to slip through because it just doesn't make its way to us.
And the other, and I'll mention before I go into answer that, the other item with the front entry garage was it was, I mean, it does call out a projection of 15 feet, but it just didn't have a new projection is where it kind of was. So if I go back to the other, so in this case, if they were coming out here and they had a they switched to a front entry garage, then I would say, because they literally did add on, but if I'm not sure, but to answer the question of is, and looking at it, is there a new precedent set at this point? And talking about this, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that at that point.
I don't mean to jump on you at all. I'm just ruminating on this myself too.
Because before we had, so we have in the past conversion, like before the guidelines changed, it talked about conversion of carports, and that was like a fuzzy area as well. But it's because usually carports are, you know, a one single bay, then you're going to a 2-car garage with a door. And that was a little bit fuzzy, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Am I the only one? I'm happy to sit down and be quiet if I'm the only one that has this concern. I'm just curious if this is something we want to look at or not.
I'd be more, you know, did they provide an idea what the garage door is going to look like?
Let me pull up the plans.
I definitely think it's something we should look at.
I agree too.
Just give me one.
It sounds like maybe even this one petitioner, just in general, the question of whether if someone's converting a space of their existing house to move the garage door to the front, is that something we want to look at or allow staff to just approve?
That's another where we were hoping. So last week, this was deferred as we received a letter from one of the trustees about the review of it. And that's where we heard from the petitioner, but not the trustee. So we honestly don't believe they had the meeting. And I don't know who reached out to who in that case but I don't believe we heard anything. So the subdivision was local the last meeting. I don't know if there's anyone here this evening on, actually, I think one of the neighbors might be on actually, but not the same subdivision trustee.
Well, I think we want to make sure that the trustees have an opportunity to take a look at this. Because I believe they get approval, or they need to approval to be in compliance with their rules.
We did take a look at it, and not to defend, because it's a good question Commissioner Brophy's brought up, and it was something that we talked about when we were at the site. Along this segment of street on Briarwood, it looks like everybody has a rear entry garage. But as soon as you turn to Pricewood, whether it's on the north or south side, a precedent's been set. There's several 2-car front entry garages, several front entry garages on both sides of the street, because Briarwood kind of bisects Pricewood as it does a U off of Price Road. So if you look at the subdivision or the neighborhood as a whole, that standard's been already set. And then again, right now, the way the code is written, since they're still working within the same shell, we didn't look at that as it doesn't trigger a commission review process. If that's something we want to discuss on there, you know, we're open to that, but at this point, just knowing that those two things, that on the 2 Pricewoods there were already front entry garages and that they were working within the existing shell, didn't trigger the review for the commission, nor did the addition that's proposed in the back corner or the back end of the house. It was, and I don't believe even the pool itself triggers the commission review. It was solely because of the areas that are illustrated there in the that maroon color and the fence request that these were coming in. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the commission is just referring to those 2 issues, because the code specifically says you're conducting a site plan review. So you're looking at now the site as a whole, not just focused on any specific area as you make that determination. I don't know if that gives you more guidance or not, but I just wanted to give you that background.
That's helpful.
Well, Jonathan's looking at that. I just kind of want to point out, I know we're not talking about the fence right now, but if you do look at like a street view there's a significant drop in elevation
Yeah.
on the west-hand side where I believe that that proposed fence will be. So I'm just curious of how they're going to address that.
Yeah. Yeah, and relatedly, if you go further north on Price, there's another house that has a pool, but they chose to put it on the other side of the backyard, tucked away. And I'm interested to hear from the petitioner as to why they can't do that in this scenario, because that would avoid the need for a 6-foot fence right on that elevation change that you identified. And it would tuck it further away.
I have the same question because I think then they could also do the patio right behind the house and kind of avoid some of that. You still might have a setback issue from the back, but yeah.
It'd be a lesser impact for sure.
Yep. But Commissioner, I had the same question about the fence. I mean, I understand the desire for privacy being on a big street right there. Totally makes sense. But 6 feet versus 5 feet from that angle with the drop, I'm not sure what the difference will be.
Right.
Chairman, so as we were talking about the fence, I'll go ahead and kind of get into the fence just so we know the regulations of what is the regulation and what we're asking or what is being asked for. And also, I cannot bring up at this time the elevation for the front at this time. I'll ask, I know the petitioner's listening, so if they have it and they can email to me right now, then that's great. I hope they can, but if not, we'll get to you in a second. But I just wanted to note that within the front yard, only up to 3-foot fences are allowed. And considering where the pool location is, the pool and the pool patio is basically right on the, actually the pool itself. The pool itself is just about on the front property line. Pools by building code have to have a 4-foot fence enclosing the pool. So either I don't know how close a pool fence can be to, water, if that's enjoyable or not, but basically any pool that's being placed right there would almost need to have a fence within the front yard if they wanted to place the pool there. Now how far they go out, that's kind of up to them because, there is green space here, which is nice, they have green space, but it's really their choice to have, the pool where it's at. So only a 4-foot fence would be required for the pool. A 6-foot fence is what they are requesting at this time. Also, there are openness requirements where any fence in the front yard needs to be about up to 50% open. So the fence that they are asking for is a full privacy fence. And I'd like to go back real quick. And here's that regulation for that regarding the fences where they say no more than 36 inches in height. And through site plan review, the commission may vary that if they find some type of imposing the rules that impose some type of unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty on a property. And finally, before we go back to discussion, I'd just like to know in the site plan review, as Mr. Trejo noted for this, the site plan review is really intended to ensure that the adequate review of the potential impacts of varying these, what's the impact it's going to have on its surroundings. And that should be discussed as well. But I'll give it back to the chair, and the petitioner is here at this time.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions right now for Jonathan before we bring in the petitioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Carol.
I was just wondering, I guess we'll have to ask the petitioner this, but I was curious as to why the patio area couldn't be decreased so that it comes within what we legally require, and so we wouldn't necessitate the variance at the property edge on both sides. That makes sense?
By just kind of basically have grass on the edge of the pool. Is that what you're kind of proposing?
No, I'm wondering why the patio area itself, that amount of hard surface can't be decreased so that it comes in ultimately closer to the building and decreases the need for the variances.
This right here,
Yes.
No, I think,
decrease that, remove that, okay.
I thought you were talking about directly behind the building, you know, kind of where, but I guess that's where the addition's going. I apologize. Okay, well, if there's no other questions right now, I think let's bring on the petitioner to see if they can help address some of these questions that we have.
Mr. Ecker, who's the property owner and petitioner, has been added on. And Mr. Ecker, you should be, your audio set. I don't see your video though.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
How do I turn the video on? Oh, here we go. There we go. Everyone see me?
Yes, great,
All right.
thank you.
Great. All right. So hope everyone's having a good evening. I got several items written down here. So let me actually start on the front driveway and the front drive entry. That's actually what started the whole plan. It's kind of hard to see in the photo, but I probably have one of the worst driveways in Olivet. You actually have to, when you enter it, you actually have to swerve around the subdivision sign to get into the rear side of the garage, you know, in the backyard. So that's actually what started the whole plan. I've actually had friends that have hit the subdivision sign, and my wife actually just last week hit the house with the Tahoe, coming around the sign, not swerving back fast enough, and caught the corner of the house. So that's actually what started the whole plan. So that is real intentions. And then as we obviously were starting to like, well, let's do an entire improvement for the whole piece of property. And then of course, with COVID, a pool got thrown in it. So that's where it's at. That was the plan. So as for the setback, you know, it's really the sidewalk was just trying to get a sidewalk entrance from the front to the back, right? I have no problem if we had to put grass on that side. Since it is considered a front yard. I'm not sure how it's considered a front yard other than I understand it faces Price Road. So that was the main reason why it was just, you know, that the architect did it right over the setback. The fence is of course also, you know, trying to gain some privacy, understand, you know, I can do landscaping privacy instead. There is a lot of foot traffic. There's a lot of car traffic up and down Price. So that was the intentions there as well. And you actually asked about the pool pump. The pool pump in that plan, it's over in the back side of the house on the other side in the corner. So it's well hidden.
Okay.
And then also for space on the pool, it's hard to also tell, but there's that other side, it's a very small space. The neighbor on that, that'd be the east side. She has a huge retaining wall. It's actually on my property, which is just, that's the way the building, you know, the plan was developed in the 60s. So there's very little space on that other side to really put anything that's efficient.
Okay. Any commission members have any specific questions for Matt that you want to address? Go ahead, Richard.
So Matt, first, thanks for being here and for answering the questions. I guess you mentioned that there wasn't enough room on the other side for the pool. I'm looking at a satellite view of your house, and it looks as though there's, you know, the entire back of your house is open. So even if that retaining wall is there, why couldn't the pool just extend from that retaining wall west as far as you need to get the pool size that you're looking for?
Well, for sure, but see, really, I get the gain is when I'm allowed to build the pool up behind the, you know, the garage space, right? So I still have that same setback on that same side of that yard. So I mean, it would just be it'd be a smaller pool. I would absolutely, I could get a pool there, but it'd be small with a small patio.
Because you're taking advantage of the space where the garage is kind of set.
Yeah, it adds a lot. I mean, I mean, you can see in this spot, it's a huge rear driveway, you know, a lot of hard surface. You know, got the driveway that runs down the side of the house.
Carlos, what's the rule on the minimum height of a fence surrounding a pool?
It's 4 feet.
4 feet. And Mr. Ecker, are you willing to do a 4-foot fence, or are you insisting?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like I said, I was just trying to gain some privacy. My neighbor on the north side, you know, he's got some tall evergreens that are kind of between the Price Road and his house. So, you know, there's obviously some landscaping ways of getting just a little extra privacy.
Yeah, I guess my view of this is that you're already kind of perched up on the hill. And if you put a tall fence up, you're going to have this like monolithic thing there.
Right.
If you're stuck with a 4-foot fence, given that you already are at a height advantage, you're going to have a fairly significant amount of privacy there already.
For sure.
Will you be able to, or are you going to raise the ground, or are you going to, because the way the slopes go, it looks like you're going to lose height, you know, around the pool, you know, as it goes down that hill.
So say that again. I mean, the plans, they'll kind of self-level all that. And it's not as big as a slope as it looks. You know, obviously the driveway is there, right? So I drive up that, really that fence is just sitting on the edge of the current driveway where it's at now.
Oh, okay. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. That makes sense. For some reason, that's right. I see where you're going, and that makes sense.
Yeah, it's already flat there. It's just where the driveway would be, the old asphalt would be ripped out.
Sure. That makes sense. I was thinking it was going like 5 or 10 feet down the hill.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay. Carol, did you have any questions that you wanted to?
Yes, I was asking if there's a way to decrease the amount of patio decking, and so that you wouldn't need the 2 variances for the fence.
I mean, absolutely. And that's where, I mean, you know, the variance was for I believe it's 3-foot sidewalk that runs down the side of the garage, and then on the back side of that pool, and then on the north side of the pool. I would be fine with, you know, having grass in there. And I think that would get well back under the 5% overage. It was just more of having a sidewalk access, you know, exterior access from the front to the backyard.
Chairman, I want to clarify
Thanks, Jonathan.
what we would consider to be the patio and the walkway. The walkway right here, actually I'll go to a different slide. The walkway wasn't in question along the garage. Let me share my different screen, I'm sorry.
Doesn't that encroach as well, or no?
You can have walkways up to about 3 or 4 feet. If it's just solely a walkway, that was a part of the accessory code that just talked about walkways of a certain size and width, because they really weren't trying to be significantly doing much besides just being a walkway to get to one door to another, basically, versus an actual. So doing this to the back would really just if this pool wasn't here, it would just constitute as a walkway and there would be no question about it. But if you were, same with like a sidewalk to your front door from the street. But if you, in this particular case, if the pool wasn't here, there would be no walkway back here around the pool. So the walkway around here is a part of a bigger patio around the pool. So just want to distinguish this part of the garage wouldn't be considered the patio. It would start at the end of the garage.
It looks like the same width as a walkway around the pool. would that be?
That's true. However, it's the function for that is really to decking for the pool.
Right, right, I get it.
And that actually, thanks, Jonathan, because that actually helps me. Because I think when we were kind of going back and forth, I actually thought it was everything, past that blue line was the request of, possibly eliminating it. So, I mean, again, so that would be no problem. I mean, if we kept the sidewalk to get around the garage, but then, a grass that came up to the west and the north side of that pool.
I would ask, this is Mike, I'm sorry, but just point out that, from a community design point of view, once that fence goes up, I'm not sure what the impact of that walkway on both the west side and north side would be to the community. So I don't know that I have a whole lot of heartburn about it. And I think from just pool usage, and again, it's the petitioner's choice to build a pool. You don't really want to have grass and vegetation right up next to the pool. It's not really conducive to the water in a pool. So, I'm just throwing out my 2 cents. I think getting a 4-foot fence would be great. I think getting some landscaping on that terrace from the 4-foot fence would be something that the community would benefit greatly from. As someone who, I'm one of the people that walk by that probably every day when I do my walk. So yeah, it is a pretty severe slope, and we'll be looking up at it. So quite honestly, I think my position would be, if we could get the 4-foot fence located about where he's got shown now, I really don't see from a community impact whether that additional sidewalk or patio is really impacting all of that. So
I agree with that.
I agree with that as well.
I think I would like to get Mr. Ecker's word that he's going to put some plantings around that fence just to minimize the monolithic nature of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done some work on the interior, and we now know that we need some curb appeal and some huge improvements done on the exterior. But like I said, it all started with the driveway, because again, that driveway and the subdivision sign's been an absolute challenge.
Have you talked to the neighborhood trustees?
No, so I've actually reached out to Derek Fairchild. I've shared all the information with him. I had the architect on the email as well, if he had any concerns or anything he wanted to get addressed. I even asked him if he had preferences on landscaping or things of that. And I haven't heard anything. And I was talking to Carlos and Jonathan today and see if they actually heard anything. And I don't believe they have heard anything as well.
Carlos, is that true? I mean, have you heard anything? I know last meeting we did get an email from the neighborhood trustees, I believe.
Correct. We did at the last meeting. As of the current time, I did not receive any follow-up.
Okay. And they were aware that this was going to be tabled and moved to this today's date, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was noted in the minutes.
Okay.
Chairman, I have one more quick question, if it's okay. More of a design, just to make sure that I understand it when it comes through for permitting. So on the site plan currently in this slide, the northwest corner of the pool, so where the blue and yellow line intersect. All right, the fence that's just to the west or left. At that point, the fence will be, is proposed to be, and I think by the commission, 5 feet in height, or no, 4 feet in height, or whatever height that the commission decides to have there. Then as that fence continues north, just want to make sure there's an understanding from my end, so when it comes in for permitting, that fence is going to drop quite significantly in grade to all the way to the neighbors, to the rear lot line or the neighbor's lot line and all that. So when you go to the visual where in the Google visual, I just want to make sure that there's an understanding that pool deck is not going to be screened by the fence if you're looking south.
That's a very good point.
And just to make sure that the petitioner understands that that is their design intent, or they're considering that area is getting graded, because that's not what's shown here.
Well,
Does that make sense?
Is where the existing telephone poles are, is that assume is in the 5-foot easement, correct? So where, on that slope, where's the property line?
I think it might be around the telephone poles, just about.
Yeah, I believe the telephone poles are pretty much at the property line.
So it would have the elevation similar to what's going on the west, maybe plus or minus a foot.
Yeah.
Would the intent be keep the fence on your side of the poles, I assume?
Yeah, it was on my side of the pole, and I mean, it's, again, I don't know if you could look on Google Maps, but it's the same grade. I mean, that telephone pole right in that corner that's just off from the driveway, it's all in the same grade.
Okay.
Okay, good. And you're going to keep 4 foot all the way around then, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't change in height.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I'm scrolling through right now.
One other someone asked about the garage door. My plan is to put like a modern looking, kind of a looking garage door to the front.
With some architectural detail, or something rather than just a plain door?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the plan is to redo the front pad and the front door entry. And there's 3 little pillars, 3 pillars that get added. Again, it improves curb appeal significantly.
And I think we could have staff review that, and if there was a concern, they could bring it back up to us. Carlos, would you be okay with that?
Yes, Chairman, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from from the board members? Otherwise, we'll open it up for some public comments.
All right, Chairman, I ask if anybody in the participants area would like to speak. If you can just note, raise your hand. I know the back neighbor is on, Mr. Song, and if you'd like to speak, I can transfer you over.
Carlos, can you explain to him how to raise his hand?
And actually, I asked if he would, if he wants to unmute while I was a participant, and that hasn't happened yet. So, Mr. Song, I'm going to ask if you want to unmute and speak. And
Hello?
Mr. Song, you should be on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Dan Song, neighbor on the north side, 60 Price Woods Lane. We're really supportive of what Matt's doing and are encouraged by it. He's even, if you look at the drawing, he's even had a little gate for us so that we could come on over anytime. So he's a good neighbor.
That sounds like a bribe was made. Well, that is good. That is a good neighbor. So, all right. Well, if that's it, is there any other questions or comments, Carlos?
One thing, Jonathan, what are the stormwater, how are they addressing stormwater through the plan, or what has been discussed?
Yes, sir. So what has been discussed, and we do look at the overall impact on stormwater, even with the driveway, but what would need stormwater mitigation is usually just like an actual house or an accessory component to it. So they're actually not, if you look at the accessory amount, they are removing, the pool is included as an a pervious area for the sense of calculating the mitigation. So they are removing some of the asphalt that was previously a driveway, but they're looking to use a French drain that actually drains somewhere onto the North Price front yard area. Is from my talks with his design team or landscaper, I forget which one at the time, Paula, that was, and Dan, that is. So they were looking to actually pipe under into the front yard area. So in our talks about doing some landscaping, they noted also that they would have landscaping and that they could pipe something into a landscape bed. So also, because we also brought up erosion on the hill, whenever you have hills and you have, you know, some type of hard pipe, you want to make sure that you don't create a cavity that erodes over time. Also, we were concerned about the sidewalk over here on Price, where you don't want, you know, this hard pipe of water spilling out onto a sidewalk to make it, you know, all mildewy all the time. So that's why they were going to, from the discussion, they were going to put some type of French drain and just have it flow out onto the hill somewhere way away, well away from the sidewalk was the discussion. But no actual detention was required for it.
Great. Thanks for the explanation, Jonathan. There doesn't seem to be a good discharge point without it rolling over the sidewalk, though.
No, I think it has to, but it's about putting it into, you know, where the landscape bed may be. That's really probably the best space to hopefully diffuse a lot of the water. So.
Oh, that'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? If I don't hear any, do I hear a motion? And remember, this is two motions we have to make, one for the fence variation as well as the pool flat work.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Brian.
First motion, motion to approve the petition for a site plan review to authorize a variation at 1 Vernon Woods Lane to allow the construction of a fence. So, Carlos, do I call out our change of the 4 foot here?
Yes, just note maximum 48 inches.
With a maximum of 48 inches under section 435.030.b3, exceed the maximum 36-inch height for fences along the front yard setback area along Price Road, not to exceed 48 inches.
Oh, yes, this is great. Look at this.
Under section 435.
Dan, oh, excuse me. Dan Song, if you don't mind muting yourself, that would be great. Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
Under section 435.030B5, permit a fence exceeding 50% of the open area requirement to allow 0 open space between slats, as presented in the memorandum from Department of Planning and Community Development, dated August 20, 2020, subject to any staff conditions noted therein. And then also I'll add in the addition the request for landscaping to be added that was called out.
Chairman, I'll second.
Okay, great. Motion's been made by Brian Lewis and seconded by Carol Wagner. I think, Richard, I think you tried to second it, but I can't tell. So I'm just going to go.
Happy to defer to Carol.
All right, good. Carlos, will you please call roll?
Commissioner Spiegelglass?
Approved.
Commissioner Saunders?
Approved.
Commissioner Lewis?
Approve.
Commissioner Brophy?
Approved.
Commissioner Rich?
Approve.
Commissioner Wagner?
Approved.
And Commissioner Jurgell?
Approved.
The motion passes with the amendment 7-0.
Great. Do I hear motion number 2? Who would like to make that? Mike, I see you're unmuted, so you're up.
I was gonna, Brian did such a great job on the first one, I was gonna let him do the second one.
But he had himself muted, but he's unmuted now.
I'm ready then. All right. Motion to approve flat work associated to proposed in-ground pool, which will, under section 400.1592.b1.b.1, will cause the total flat work on the subject property grounds to exceed the maximum 5% authorized, and under section 400.192.b.1.d, parentheses 1, be located in a portion of the front yard setback area along Price Road and under section 400.1592.b.1.d 2B to be located no greater than 2 feet within the side yard setback at 1 Burnhamwood Lanes through the site plan, community design, and concept stormwater management plan review as presented in the memorandum from Department of Planning and Community Development dated September 3rd, 2020, subject to any staff conditions noted therein.
Well done.
I will second that well done motion.
Motion made by Brian Lewis, seconded by Richard Brophy. Carlos, will you please call the vote?
Commissioner Spiegelglass,
Approved.
Commissioner Saunders,
Approved.
Commissioner Lewis,
Approved.
Commissioner Brophy,
Approved.
Commissioner Rich,
Approved.
Commissioner Wagner,
Yes.
Commissioner Jurgell,
Approved.
and the motion passes unanimously 7-0.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
You too.
Yeah, have a good evening.
All right, we'll move. Before we move on to new business, I think maybe we'll. I think it might be appropriate to discuss the quality of life items that we deferred from last meeting. Anybody on the commission have any problems with that?
Chairman, if I can note, and I do understand and respect the motion, but the only other person on there is the next applicant.
Oh, okay. So I guess I was doing it just mainly for the members that had to wait so long, members of the public that had to wait so long last meeting. So if they're not present, I think let's continue on with new business. Any objections? Seeing none, I'll move on to item A, 9445 Bonham Woods. Petition type is a variation under the site plan review. The variations for a replacement fence post to face on the non-enclosed side. Petitioner is Michael Hill. Property owner is Laura and Michael Hill. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chairman. And we have the second fence variation for the evening. So this one, if you have different from the other one, that was a front yard. This one is a variation for the fence posts to face the outside of the enclosed area. So normally the fence post, or as some people refer to as the ugly side versus the nice side. The ugly side is enclosing the backyard, and the nice side is facing your neighbors. So part of section 435-040 under chapter 435 fences, A3, all new or replacement fences shall be constructed with posts, framing, and other structural support facing away from the facing the enclosed area. And this particular case, and site plan review is the procedure along with the unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty to consider and approve this. And this particular case, going the opposite way. And what would staff consider, just so if this ever comes up, if you were just replacing a few of your slats of your fence or just a few sections, this we would administratively allow that. But as you're removing the entire fence, then that's going back to the ordinance, all new or replacement fences. So this would fall under the replacement fence. In this case, they are looking, actually I'll go to this survey real quick. Is Bonham Woods Drive is the property. Highlight myself. Bonham Woods is the property here. The house in question has a fence, actually two different types of fences. On the side, it actually has an open, like the wrought iron type fence. And then in the back here, it actually has a 6-foot privacy fence. That then it backs up to the concrete ditch, which is what you kind of see if you go along the bike trail that leads to Stacy Park. Part of it is an open channel, or open like a dirt channel, and the other part starting on this property just about is an actual wide concrete channel that you see here. then you have a wooden bridge so you can still access the other side of the property and you can mow it and that stuff. In this particular case, they are showing actually another fence, a 5-foot fence that actually is enclosing the actual rear of the property. So in this case, this particular fence is enclosing the yard, but there's also another fence. And you can see what it looks like from the aerial. You can see from the rear, that's Bonham Woods here, and this is Cordell Court and Harvest and Cherry Tree, and here's that bike trail, and Stacy Park is this way. So you can see, you can actually really see that concrete channel, and you really can't see the rear of the property. And from the front side, well, it's just enclosing their backyard. Back to this. So this is what the existing fence looks like, and here's another part of the fence where some of the parts needs to be repaired. And then you can see their 5-foot open fence that goes along the property lines. And this is the type of fence that they noted that they're going to replace it with. So basically the same type of privacy fence. In your staff reports, attached is a letter from the petitioner that notes the reasoning and their reasoning for the hardship to install the fence with the post facing the opposite way. And you have a moment to read that. But at this point, Mr. Hill, who is the petitioner, is on the call, and I can answer any questions or comments the commission may have this time, and Mr. Hill can directly address any other questions.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mike. I do have a question for Jonathan or Carlos, but this fence is not on the property line. This fence is set back in from the property line. I forget what the distance is off the top of my head, but it's a pretty significant amount. Does our ordinance really require that a fence in the middle of somebody's property that's basically facing their property on both sides? Does this requirement actually? I'm trying to understand why this comes into play. Because if he turned this fence 90 degrees and it was still running down the middle of his property, and he just wanted to create a privacy fence within his property, would this be an issue?
Sure. Yeah, no, actually, that's a very good question and there was a consideration of that, and I'll just note this real quick. Well, I'll answer that question real quick as why it's here. The side, if you could follow the red dot here, right? You see the red dot. Okay, so that's the side yard that technically the side yard extends all the way back. Same thing on this side too. This piece technically here above the 26 and this piece next to the 13 technically would be in a side yard. So with a side yard or a rear yard, the rear yard actually starts just about right behind the fence. So you're correct on that. It's in the middle, it's outside the rear yard. But this area here and this area here technically is within the side yard. So within side yards or rear yards, the regulation would apply. So if they would have done it right here from the back of the house, going back to where they are, it wouldn't be here.
Got it. Okay.
Also, that kind of brings up another question that you don't have to think about on this, but could someone put a 10-foot fence up in the middle of their yard under that? And that's another thing that.
Yeah, we don't need to go there. We're already.
Well, we're not going. Right?
Yeah, we're already an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah,
meeting, so.
But they're not asking for a 10-foot fence. But
no.
I
was just. Okay, so really it's just the side yard issues is the variance.
Just to make sure the commission understands, within the code itself, the way the ordinance is written, it specifically says the area to be enclosed, and that's a determination we have to make in there. So even though there may be two separate fences, because he's got a fence at the very rear of the property too. That segment of fence is enclosing between that house and where that fence is located. So that's why that interpretation is done that way.
Well, maybe he's trying to enclose the creek.
You could, argue that, but it would be just we look at it's an accessory to the principal structure.
Understood.
So.
Okay, well, I think at this point, maybe we can discuss, bring the petitioner on.
And we'll do so. 1 second here.
Chairman,
Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
just ask a quick question. So as I understand the way this lot works, there isn't anybody that would see the first fence because there isn't going to be anybody in the channel. Is that correct?
That's how I see it.
It seems the only way that would change is if the petitioner decided to strip all the honeysuckle, and then the people walking along the path would see the opposite side of the fence.
All right, Chairman, I believe I have Mr. Hill. You've now been promoted to a panelist, and I believe your audio and video, I know your video is working. So
let me just make sure that that answered your question, Carol.
Close enough.
All right, good. Okay. Go ahead, Michael. I appreciate you coming.
Thanks, everyone. Good evening. Essentially, I will stand by the statement that I provided the commission, but I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Does anybody on the commission have any specific questions? Seeing none, I appreciate you being on. And is there any more further discussion, or do I hear a motion?
Commissioner Jervil?
Yes, sir.
I'll make a motion to approve the petition for site plan review to authorize a fence variation at 9445 Bonham Drive to allow the construction of a fence with posts, framing, and other structural support to face the non-enclosed area as noted in the plans before the commission. And is presented in the memorandum from Department of Planning and Community Development dated September 3rd, 2020, subject to any staff conditions noted therein.
Do I hear a second?
Chairman, I'll second.
Motion's been made by Richard Brophy, seconded by Carol Wagner. Carlos, will you please call the roll call vote?
yes, sir. Mr. Spiegelglass?
Approved.
Commissioner Saunders?
Approved.
Commissioner Lewis?
Approved.
Commissioner Brophy?
Approved.
Commissioner Rich?
Approved.
Commissioner Wagner?
Approved.
And Commissioner Jergel?
Approved.
And the motion to grant or authorize the variation passes unanimously 7-0.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we'll move on to item B, which is 12 Forsythia Lane. Petition type is a community design concept stormwater management plan review.
Chairman, I have nobody on at this time, so I would ask to defer. And if anybody pops up, I'll let you know.
That sounds great. So let's move on to item 7, discussion items, quality of life items. Carlos?
All right, I'm gonna switch screens here with Jonathan, so bear with us just 1 second, sir.
No worries.
Okay, Chairman, and this was kind of introduced at our first meeting in August, directed from the council for the commission to consider developing some regulations regarding what I kind of termed urban farming, which were more specifically some landscaping, garden, and somewhat livestock issues that the council was trying to address this summer in terms of whether these issues were, consistent over time, or so. We knew of a couple of properties where every once in a while we would have some issues, whether it was regarding chickens or the hawk at one time, some extensive landscaping and gardening that was occurring here and there, and that with with the pandemic and such, a lot more people were spending time at home, and we were getting a frequency of calls regarding activities, again, kind of related to what I'm terming urban farming. You know, some type of very ecologically sustainable type of activities that occur on residential property that typically are dealing with at a scale seen more in rural areas, but being applied more in an urban environment such as Olivet. We do have a variety of lot sizes, but our density though is probably more urban than it is suburban as you get further out west. In doing so, we've had discussions with the councils regarding our regulations, which for the most part were effective, but they weren't specifically clear, and they allowed a lot of latitude in their interpretation. And on our end, from the enforcement side, we go based on what past practices have been and where we've been supported by through the court process of what defines, what to what extent our authority goes. Over time, with an increase in these urban farming type of activities, that gray area of what is regulated and what isn't regulated expanded. I think council was being, through their constituents, there was concerns expressed, and they had various discussions throughout the summer or late spring and summer regarding these. And ultimately, one of the discoveries is that through our current ordinances, it's not very distinct of who has jurisdiction over what issues. If there was an issue with chickens, they would typically call my department, which commonly is referred like to the building department. And pending what those chickens were doing, we would refer them that they may be more of a police matter and that they should be calling dispatch in there. So, for example, if and when they hit nuisance kind of issues, it was kind of difficult to determine, again, between the various departments who had jurisdiction and who was to pursue that. Ultimately, again, the council had a discussion through the late spring and the early part of summer, and had inquired about consolidating a lot of these type of urban farming issues into the land use code, because they are activities that, they are land use activities. There usually are accessory functions to the primary purpose of the district, like a residential district, and placing that under the auspices of I think it's chapter 16 is our accessory structures and uses, and trying to consolidate a lot of these into one centralized location so it's easier for residents to access, also to understand, as opposed to going to various sections in the code in there. Again, I'll stress that when there is an issue, again, using the chicken metaphor, with chickens, chapter 200, which is our nuisance code, is utilized. Chapter 400, which is our land use code, and then there are some other sections or other chapters that were used to deal with whether it was a noise issue, whether it was again, going back to the nuisance, or whether it was a trespassing or so. And the goal in this process is, again, to kind of consolidate, to identify these as land use activities and set up a process for regulation. I think the council was cognizant that, again, the goal here isn't to over-regulate these, but to set or establish some standards of what is acceptable, especially here in this suburban, urban type of environment in there, as it relates to some livestock being chickens, bees, and things like that. And various, or several of our neighbors have limitations on the amount that you can have. Our code does not. And what we've done in the past to try to address this issue is, in an accessory code, we created limitations on the type of structures used to house these things as one way to control it, but apparently it wasn't as successful as I had hoped. The other aspect is, again, as people are looking at landscape opportunities, One to be, again, environmentally cognizant, sustainable, and you know, following a lot of the trends of going green and doing prairies and all that. You know, they started small, and then they kept getting bigger and bigger to points that in some properties it takes an entire lot in there. And you know, what the goal of the council is asking the commission to determine what is a reasonable extent of these type of practices to be applied on residential properties. The same with gardening. The goal here is not to regulate gardens or establish standards for your typical garden. It's the ones that became overly excessive and started pushing pushing the line of what was reasonable, what was not reasonable, but really by code, there are no parameters to say you can't, whether you can or can't do this. And then also to provide some venue of where, again, similar to our accessory structures, that if you exceed that there is a means or a way to look at a property and make a judgment call based on its size, area, location, and such, if some latitude should be allowed or so. And finally, there's a role of trying to place some type of you know, comfort level that, you know, residents are educated in terms of what endeavor they're going into, that they have the information necessary to do that type of use, and ultimately on our end that there is some form of closure or end game that they're cognizant or aware. You know, what happens when, you know, you don't want the chickens anymore, or what happens when you can't the garden becomes overburdening and you just can't do it anymore. That there was a means to know where these are at, a means to keep track on those, and to make sure that there is some means that that there is some type of process of concluding or conclusion if it had to get to that. So we looked at those in there, and again, it's my opinion to the council that they are land use type of activities, and noted that in an effort to coordinate the process and to direct residents to a more centralized location, we would be glad to take them on as accessory type of uses that take place on residential properties. I'm going to ask if our liaison, or council liaison, has anything to expand on that. I think I kind of covered what the council was facing and what that directive was, but I know that there's more to this from the political side in terms of trying to respond to your constituents and such.
What I'll add to this is several things. Number one, the council wanted this to be a mindful conversation with a quick turnaround, with information and thoughts back, recommendations back to the council by October. The council's looking at this in multiple ways. First off, more than just this year, we've had complaints with regard to noise, animals, type of animals. I'll go into snakes, rabbits, while they haven't been addressed recently, snakes, rabbits, bees, beehives, roosters that we're hearing are keeping people up. And basically what has happened is everyone has called the police for these type of issues. And given where we are, we're looking at our own law enforcement and where we are, given the times of today, the chief and the city and the council looked at what should our police department be doing on one end, what is law enforcement, where should they be doing their work, and where are they doing things that really should not be their focus. So that was one aspect of this, guys, just one aspect. The other one was the constant complaining from people, somebody working in the yard 12 hours a day, running a chipper, constantly cutting things away from morning to night. So given, the conversation between staff, Mr. Trejo and his staff, city manager and council, it was considered this really needs to go back to you are the body with regard to regulation zoning. How can we balance this with not letting some things getting overly obnoxious, but allowing people to do what they would like to do on their property. And as Mr. Trejo said, with the ability of how do we undo what you may have done that you no longer want to do. So he really summed it up much. And again, my ad here is we're looking at it both on the law enforcement aspect, as Carlos said, the regulation aspect, who's got the jurisdiction aspect. And we really wanted it back to you guys for some food, some thought when it does come to the things of landscaping, gardening, and farming, from bees to rabbits to roosters. What is the limit? How many, is considered reasonable. So those kinds of things is what we want you to be looking at and thinking about to give some advice and consideration and recommendation back to the council, given that council has given some parameters to Carlos that he's already dialoguing with you. So that's really all I have to add.
Hey, Missy, if I may, has there been any investigation into what other communities are doing about these kinds of issues? Perhaps something you can learn from?
Well, and I'll let Carlos kind of go from there, because that was the first question we kind of asked to the staff as well. What are other communities? What are they doing? And Mr. Trejo did bring that information to us. We then kind of framed some of our measurables of, what we would consider acceptable to begin the conversation on your end. So, I believe Carlos will be, Mr. Trejo will share that with you as well.
Missy, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If who or is the city thinking should enforce these types of ordinances?
Who does the city think should enforce this type of ordinances?
Right.
Well,
would it be, a building inspector of some type? I'm just trying to, if it's not the police.
If I can answer that, yes, the council made a cognizant decision that these matters did not rise to the level of having a police officer go on knock on somebody's door. But it was reasonable for my staff. They are building inspectors, but they're also code enforcement officers. And these are the types of matters, whether it's a stormwater issue, whether it's a gutter issue, whether it's a sidewalk,
So if a contractor starts too early and there's a noise related issue, is that addressed by the police or is that addressed by?
That is addressed by the police given the various hours.
Well, similarly, if a dog is barking early morning or late at night, akin to a chicken or rooster crowing, presumably that would also be a police issue.
It would, but it would under noise. But the real situation here is it's neighbor to neighbor. And is it the city's job to mediate neighbor to neighbor issues through law enforcement? And that's the way the community has kind of handled it before. And again, given everyone's looking at what are the best practices for law enforcement, this is one of those areas where we're saying this is not law enforcement. It really does fall back under some parameters that you kind of better define from what we've kind of set out as a parameter. And then it does deal with enforcement by the code enforcement staff and personnel. When it goes to a level of a different violation, Carlos can speak to this. If there needs to be a citation, then that's when it generates itself through the legal system of the courts.
This is Mike. If I could ask a question, And I could very well imagine a situation where a neighbor is not happy about a dog barking or a chicken squawking or something else, and just by nature might just dial 911. What happens when they get a call like that? Do they say this is not an emergency? Call your local police. How is something like that handled so you can start getting the police to step back? Because I 100% agree with you. This, the police are stretched way too thin, and God bless them for what they do, but they shouldn't be dealing with dogs barking or chickens squawking. But how does it physically happen when just by routine someone might say, I'm going to call the police and dial 911 because that's what everybody knows to dial?
Well, I'll just briefly say a few words and let Carlos punt on this. My police chief has said to us, when a call comes in there, they have to go to a call when a call comes in. Beyond that, what happens when it goes back to the staff, I'll let Carlos speak to that.
Yeah, it's a good question. All of these are really good questions. And over the past couple of years, and specifically with Chief Wolf in there, we've had more collaboration between the two departments in there, where of course during off hours they would attend to something that may not be specifically a police matter, but they'll record it and then refer it to my staff, that night or the following day for us to follow up, and they'll even partner with us to go do the follow-up and such. So we've had more coordination on that part, and that helps us because, again, it's rarely after 6 that I'll have a staff member here that will go to look and address something. And many times that's when, especially like noise issues are happening. The police will follow through, they'll record it, and if the issue happens during the day, dispatch again does call an officer. But again, we have better collaboration with them. Nothing with the way it was before. It's just that we've increased our shared resources, and they'll either inform us or they'll follow up if the matter, because they're required to, because every time you call 911, it generates some type of a receipt or a report, and you have to close it. And then they'll forward that or give us a copy of that, and then our inspectors kind of follow up on it. And I know they've had conversations where they've referred to others that it's not a police matter, but that they would have, they would bring it to my attention or the inspector's attention to address. And it doesn't directly answer what you're asking, but the communication between the two departments has increased substantially in the past couple of years.
I would agree with that. And on the conversation with the law enforcement aspect of it, the complainer, the caller is encouraged when there's a violation, you need to make a police report. And 9 times out of 10, their failure to make the police report stops the ability for law enforcement to proceed in those cases where maybe they should proceed. So again, it's neighbors wanting the city to resolve what they're uncomfortable with, or what they have to see every day or drive by or hear at 3, 4, or 5 in the morning, or until 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
And at that point, this is where it becomes very critical, because the current regulations in place, and they've been effective for several years in there, but they're not very prescriptive. They're not very prescriptive, and I may have the term incorrect. And that's where it puts my staff in to make the decisions based. Okay, I went with something similar to court, 2 years ago, and the judge said, threw it out, or nothing happened, or so. So therefore, I'm not going to, I can't address it as an issue. The goal here is, if I can get a little bit more descriptive of what those parameters are, it helps my staff to get closer to a black and white. We'll never get there, in there to where the decision is it's either, you know, zoning's easy. It's a numerical, it's black and white, and it's simple to do. The code enforcement's hard because there's a lot of vagueness in some of in ways that some of these are drafted, and probably purposely in there. And that's where I think, you know, taking ownership of them through the Department of Planning and Community Development and developing reasonable standards would be more effective and more helpful for my inspectors.
If I may, I have two quick questions. One of them, have we talked to Paul Martin about any of this stuff to get some guidance from him on who's supposed to be slotted to handle what kinds of issues?
Yeah, and he's been involved. I'll let the council liaison answer that.
Yeah, you know, we did have a conversation with Paul Martin on it, and I believe, Carlos, you and city staff had an additional conversation with him as well. So we've always been kind of mindful to gather all the information in our basket, have our own conversation of staff and council, and then those parameters of where we land come to you. And that's really where this is now. And then even after you come back with a recommendation or your thoughts, you know, this council will have further dialogue, and that will again go through Paul Martin for ongoing discussion. And it always goes through the conversation of Carlos and the city manager. So.
And I'll note, and again, in that discussion, and I think Council Liaison, you kind of left out the critical part, was there was discussion of whether that would have been something that would just be drafted and ultimately go to the council and placed. Again, other sections of the code don't require the commission's review. In the discussions with the council, I noted that, you know, on land use items, they're required for these public meetings and a public hearing, and that would give an opportunity for the public to provide some input in the process, as opposed to Mr. Martin drafting up an ordinance and then getting adopted straight through council. And not to say that those meetings aren't open, but those meetings don't have the same public participation as a public, you know, as what the commission does, and then forces the council to have a public hearing before they're adopted. Good or bad, but it gives them more opportunity for residents or the community to kind of chime in their thoughts.
So I guess that's really helpful. My other comment, I suppose, is that this seems like a fairly amorphous issue for us to be grappling with. And I wonder whether it makes sense as an initial step for us to try to discretize this a bit and identify certain categories of issues, you know, animals / noise, farming, wild grass and wildland areas, you know, get it into these defined buckets. And then maybe we can tackle each of those buckets in turn. Because I think right now there's just such a big issue. It's almost impossible for us to have an efficient and meaningful dialogue about any one of them. I don't know if I'm the only one that has that view.
Mr. Chairman, I have a similar question. I think that was a good follow-up to this and add to the thought process. I'm not sure, at least as I look at some of these issues, that all aspects of them belong in the planning commission traditionally. For instance, there's a nuisance aspect to it, and there's the aspect of, is it a proper land use for the site? Should be in the backyard, front yard. I mean, is a chicken coop appropriate on site? That's a different issue than what kind of animals can a suburban homeowner have. So they're not, to me, they're not discrete issues. And I think as we go through and discuss these, there may be others in the city that need to have some input into some of this, because they're not purely land use kinds of issues.
I kind of understand what you're talking about, especially with the animals, because some family members, even people that I know of that have had chickens, not necessarily in Olivet, but they think of them as their pets. And that's going to be a tricky thing are the animals, I think. But I do think there's a point where it definitely becomes a nuisance, and we need to have something written down to kind of help distinguish between when it becomes a pet and when it becomes a livestock, so to speak. Some of the other questions or concerns too is, I was looking under this Baldwin, the example for Baldwin, and they use the term noxious weeds, and one of those is marijuana. And I mean, aren't there some, like, I think people are allowed now with the current standards or the current regulations, they're allowed to grow a certain number of plants.
Yeah.
So that would have to be just incorporated too. But I do think what we could do is let Carlos and Jonathan kind of draft up some initial thoughts, and maybe if they were in separate sections, then we can kind of go through it and see if we can, if 2 out of 3 of these are easy to pass right away, we can go ahead and do that. And then if one has to take a little bit more time, then we can spend that time with that particular item to go into a little bit more further detail. And that would allow things to kind of keep moving efficiently, I think.
I would say that the biggest complaint that is the noise of the animals. So if there were to be something that you say, what do we want to kind of look at to give back to the council by October? That's what I've heard more in the past year, from the chickens to the dogs to the roosters.
Would this kind of be something like, if you have a cat or a dog, you have to register it. So if we have any other animals, is that something we're going to have registered? And for people that have these already, it would really be tough to tell them they got to get rid of one of their animals that they might construe as a pet.
That's a good conversation to have. Do you regulate it? Do they have to register just like we do the dogs and the cats? I mean, there could be a big answer right there with regards to a certain portion of being able to, for the city to know what's in there. I bet we have beehives that the city has no idea that there's families doing beehives, things of that nature. So, that could be one beginning of the city being more aware of it. And then that allows inspectors to go around and check. So, I'm not here to give you your recommendations, but, clearly that's good food for thought.
And it may need something that needs to be registered on a, annual basis. I'm not sure if that's what we do for dogs and cats, but, because, these animals tend to multiply.
We do that for dogs and cats regularly, and we do that for rental property, so.
Yeah, so I would see it following that same aspect, so to speak. And then one consideration too is do we grandfather? I mean, these animals have a certain lifespan, so is it something we would consider, for the existing ones that they have, is to grandfather it in, so then you could eventually control it later, or if there's anything else we could do from a nuisance noise standpoint. Allow them to grandfather it, but see if they could do anything to help mitigate some of those noise.
And I don't know if I've shared a story here, and I'll be brief about it, but we have someone who I really expected to be on this tonight, who has been very bothered by a rooster that crows all day, all night, is what he says. And look, I have a place at the lake, and my neighbor had a rooster for 2.5 years, and that rooster crowed all day and all night. I couldn't sleep, so it's kind of like you get a little empathy because you've experienced it.
Right.
So
you just needed the BB gun, that's all.
Stop that.
I gotta tell you, I'm not someone who likes guns, but that if I could have woken up and sleepwalked with a little, but what ended up getting it was another animal 2.5 years later. So,
well, is that kind of thing within our purview? Back to Carol's point, is that within our purview to deal with that kind of issue, whether you can have roosters or not?
I believe it is. I believe we can.
And Paul has supported that view?
I can't say he has not supported. He's aware of the conversation and where we're going and the animals and things that we've talked about. And then with some of the things that I've seen that has been presented from other municipalities, there are limitations in those municipalities as well. I don't think we're here to say no. I think we're here to say you don't need to be excessive. You don't need to be obnoxious. And where is that happy medium?
I'm sorry.
Ms. Sharon,
Go ahead, Carol.
Missy, could you explain to us today how the city regulates, say, dogs, horses, any other other animals?
Carlos put horses on that list. We forgot about that one. Dogs and cats and various, they have to be registered every year. You get your tags for your dogs, you get your cats, and we did increase the amount of dogs and cats to 4. It used to be no more than 3, and majority of council chose to go ahead and increase that number to 4. So that's with regards to our animals. I don't think we have regulation when it comes to a reptile or a snake or a turtle or the bees or rabbits or chickens. My indenture is what is supposed to control that in my community. So, I'm not sure we have those other farm animal kind of regulations in the city other than dogs and cats.
So Missy, who enforces those regulations today?
Would it not be your department, Carlos?
I think it goes.
Well, police too, depending.
Yeah, it's whether it's police, it's us. In the end, those issues, because they're not necessarily the life safety issues, are referred to us.
And if they're a violation, then it goes to citation to court.
So most of those things that you mentioned, like the turtles, the other animals, those are predominantly inside. I generally don't think that's an issue. We're talking more about the outdoors animals. But
I differ with you on snakes, but okay.
Well, that's where I'm going. That's exactly where I'm going.
Okay.
Where I think we might need to even limit, some poisonous snakes or something that could be.
Curious though, like if we're not the ones who decided 4 animals versus 3, why are we able to weigh in on chickens and snakes? And it's like, I feel like it's all or none. I think Carolyn said it well, in that I think we would absolutely weigh in on a chicken coop could only be so big, or a garden could only be so big, or a beehive could only have so many of this. Like, I think that's where we weigh in on, but we didn't determine the dogs and cats. So to all of a sudden have some animals be ours, but other animals be the council's, doesn't make.
I think you're on. I think you're on focus of exactly what it is. What are and again, I keep calling it parameters or measurables. What is the size of the chicken coop? What is the size that you're allowed in the garden? So to me, that's the avenue I'm looking for from this body.
Okay, that makes sense to me if we're weighing in on that. But then I hate to say it though, before we even decide that though, to me, I would think the city council should weigh in on, are chickens allowed at all? Because if they're not allowed, then we don't even need to make a decision on the coop. If they are allowed, then we jump in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think we gave some of that, I think we gave some of that guidance to Carlos of what we're looking to tolerate, what we're not. And at the end of the day, like Carlos said, there's going to be the feedback from the people that could further define what is a draft consideration. But, we're hearing it about, these very particular animals that, I haven't heard before in my lifetime till the last 2 years. People are doing their own eggs. They're, eating their own chickens after a while. And again, those are the measurables: amount, size of what your garden's going to be, what is going to be allowable vegetation,
Well, and I think, yeah, again, I think it's if it's a structure, we weigh in, but I think the guidelines should, at least top of my head, feel like they can come in terms of, because you could get very specific on like why is a goat okay but a donkey's not? Why is a 4 chickens versus 6? Somebody has to draw that line, because I think it was when I was in, somebody said in Kirkwood you can do like 6 chickens but no roosters. That's very common, I find, because of the noise issues.
Yeah.
I think those are all fair discussions for the council to have, but I think I come to is if the council said chickens yes, all other things besides bunnies, cats, dogs no, then we don't need to bring up conversations. But if you said yes, snakes are okay, and I want to keep it outside, which I don't think you do, but that's fine, or whatever, or I want bees, maybe then we weigh in on saying your bee colony can only be 3 boxes. The boxes can't be this big, and they can't cover more than this much square footage. And I think that makes sense, but I don't know if it makes sense for us to start drafting guidelines until we know the parameters to work with. No pun intended, it's a little chicken and egg, if that makes sense. So.
Well, Carlos, do you feel that the council gave you that sense of direction?
The council's got some specific numbers already in place and in mind in there of what they've guided me to start that discussion. The key issue that becomes in there, and it's a really good discussion of, again, whether if it's a regulation, like we do have restriction to the ownership of cats and dogs, how many you can have. But it doesn't look, the regulations, the way they're put in place and within that chapter, it's not about it's not about the activity or action, so you say, and again, I've heard the term pets used a lot, and it brings up a really good point. So you can have 2 dogs and a cat, or 4 cats, or whatever. But when you have chickens, it's kind of looked at like you're raising chickens, and that is an action, that's an activity in there, and therefore it's looked at, you're doing it on property, so therefore it's a land use activity. And that's the perspective, talking with the council, that we looked at it. Again, it would probably be more, my department's enforcement of that process. We prefer to keep our codes, within the same chapters, so it's easier to find and really to own them, as opposed to setting it somewhere else. A lot of times things can get lost of who owns that chapter, who oversees that chapter, or things get meshed and even picked in that process. I look at them again, and I think Mr. Brophy kind of noted it, is yes, there are urban farming functions, and they're in what I've found is that there are 3 distinct buckets. There's the livestock buckets, which I'm not talking about cows, in there, but there's these urban type of activities where people raise chickens for their eggs. That's usually primarily what they're for. Then there are the vegetable
baby
gardens,
pigs,
which everybody has and does it within reason. But we've had some that have gone to the extreme, and it's trying to make sure that we have parameters to recognize the extreme. And then you have the prairies, and again, they started off within reasonable sizes in defined areas, but they've gone to the extreme. And the current codes really are not assisting staff to identify what is that extreme. And I'm not sure that really answers the specific question, Mr. Lewis, kind of thinking about it, but that's where we're at in the process. I look at them, whether you're going to be gardening, whether you're going to be landscaping, or you're going to be farming, you're doing it on, it's a land use activity that you're doing it on. And therefore, my recommendation to the council is that, that let's take it under, the land use code, as opposed to putting it somewhere else, in that process. Anything that's in the land use code, though, ultimately the commission has authority over, authority over.
But does that mean then if we set up, you mentioned baby pigs?
Brian?
Yep.
Carol, you're muted if you don't know.
So I thought Brian was talking.
He was.
So, hey, but Brian, I want you to know that you said and hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned, because I also am confused. But Carlos, I guess if there are things that you have given some thought to and have suggestions for us as to how we might deal with some of these issues, I think that might be a good place for us to start.
And the only thing I'll add to that, I understand what you're saying, Carlos, and I understand the desire and the ask. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but I think I look at it this way: is we might be able to dictate what something looks like on the outside, but if somebody wanted to keep a poisonous snake inside their house, we wouldn't necessarily have the ability to say yes or no to that. So I feel like that's where our power would be limited. We can dictate the outside land use, but not the inside, unless I'm misunderstanding our use of power, of our ability. So, I think that's why it's better from the council to make that decree, but that's just an example.
No, and it's a good point, because there is that distinction between that household pet that's in the house and those that you generally are not gonna, if you have a chicken for a pet, for example, and it stays in the house, I don't see the process of it. I concur. What is the difference between that and a cat and a dog? But if you have chickens and you keep them outside, it's not just the structure, but that activity, is all impacts land use. It's an activity.
Agreed, but it gets gray in that some people do crazy things and keep pets inside that have no business being inside. But
that's why. Yeah. I'm sorry, Brian.
No, please.
It seems to me like in order for us to have a meaningful conversation about this, we need Paul here to talk about what we can and can't do, what's within our purview and what isn't. Because I think this is all very much overlapping. And with respect, I don't think anyone on this call, including myself, is qualified to make that assessment about what's within our purview and what isn't with respect to this issue. So at the expense of coming off as abrasive, it just seems like it's a little bit of a waste of time for us to talk through this without having some clear guidance about what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. Because once we can find out what we're allowed to do, then we're off and we can share our opinions and come up with a clear set of proposals for the council. But until then, I think we're adrift without a paddle.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we have Carlos maybe talk to Paul, about this, see if we can kind of define some parameters. Maybe Carlos can kind of, develop that straw dog, if you will, between what some other communities have put forth, as well as what some of the council wants to talk about. And then we can kind of get into some concrete details.
I think that sounds great.
Okay, good. Anything else, Carlos, on this, or should we move on?
Nope, I would say if we can move on. And I still don't have, I had somebody that popped up just a second ago, but I didn't recognize him. Jonathan, I sent you a text if you recognize the name.
No, it was a Matt Stewart, and unless that's where the council liaison was talking about who was the person about the roosters, otherwise I have no idea. Then,
no.
Yeah.
All right.
Let me check my.
Chairman, if we can go on to the stormwater discussions, then.
Yeah, I think so. And if the person who's online, if they have a particular comment, go ahead and leave it in the Q&A. Maybe we can circle around and pick that up. All right, let's go to item B, stormwater management. Jonathan?
Here, and I'm going to share my screen. Oh, and just so you know, that person did not leave a comment for us. So
good.
No comment. Okay, so with stormwater management, we have the 7 areas of emphasis for the stormwater management planning that we're doing in-house. And this evening, I know loss of vegetation was highlighted. That's from the last time we were going to talk about weather and what the intensity and the frequency has been.
And Jonathan, real quick, you can go back to that slide just so the commission's aware. You know, based on the past discussions, and I think Mr. Saunders, you have brought up about the impervious area with parking lots and that. So we did add an additional category here, an additional contributor. So, and it was kind of breaking that construction up to talk about construction as an activity, because that prior it meant construction as an activity and the improved land. And so what we've done is now we're addressing that construction as the activity, and then impervious spaces like parking services, driveways, flat work, accessory structures, and looking at it as its own contributor.
Makes sense to me.
All right, and going forward, so we have first, in understanding the weather is to look at, not to go into the causes of rain and all that this evening, but just to look at nationally and in St. Louis, kind of what has been the trends. And when people say, wow, I never received that much water before, actually there's something to that. And this is from the National Weather Service. We have different years. I just picked a spectrum so you can see from 2005 to even last year, 2019. The amount of rain that has been seen in the Midwest has actually increased. So the gray and the blue is more of the lower amounts of rain, and then the pink and purple are the higher amounts. So in 2005, you can really not see much of, and even in 2011, you don't see much of the pink and the purple. A lot of the Midwest is green, yellow, and turning orange. And then in 2011, you start, and the star, by the way, is St. Louis area. You start seeing more orange move in. And then by 2018 and 19, you see orange, red, and more purple even moving in. So that represents, you know, the blue, what the yellow was around 25 to 30 inches of rain annually. And 2019 and 18, you're up to 40, 50, and 60 inches of rain. So it has been increasing according to the National Weather Service. Also, just on to get a close-in view of what's going on here, you can see you can see St. Louis, Clayton is right here, so probably around about right here in this area. 2005, you know, a lot of the St. Louis area, it had different shades of yellow and some orange and red. And you had 2018 and 2019, you have darker. A lot less, actually no yellow, it's actually orange, red, darker red, and even darker red. And in 2019, you even have a spot in here of pink, which indicates about 70 inches of rain a year. So it has gone from being a lot of even light yellow to dark red over a 15-year period. Also from the National Weather Service, we have seen they tracked a lot of weather from the 19th century, and you've seen that on this trend line, a lot of it has stayed, it has its ups and downs, but and more recently, it has this purple trend line has the 30-year running mean has increased. At the same time, you can see these bars up here. Since in the 1980s, it has reached 55 years. It only goes up to about the year 2000, so we don't have the last 20 years on here, but you could see in the last 20 years before, it has substantially increased the amount of rain in inches than the 1930s, 40s, and 50s and all that. And looking at, again, from the National Weather Service, they break down every day the amount of precipitation a day, and within the month, so actually I'll go to this right here. This is what that slide looked like before. So this is like, let's say, let's go to August of 2020. At the time I took this, it was up until the August 19th of 2020. So you can see they record actually the amount of inches of rain that was received. So on August 9th, that was a really heavy rainstorm that we had. We received over 2 inches of rain. According to the actually this other website here, the extreme precipitation events are categorized as anything that's 2 inches of rain or more within a 24-hour period. So within August, the middle of August, we did have one particular day that did record over 2 inches of rain. But if you also look at the day before that, which was, that's a pretty substantial rain, 1.7 inches of rain is pretty substantial, followed by 2 inches of rain. I mean, that's a pretty significant issue. That's when the flash flood warnings were going off too. And then follow that by another 3/4 of an inch, your water levels are not rescinded yet, and then you get another a lot more rain. Also to note that August 9th of 2020, that was a record rain. So of all the August 9th back to, again, the like 1890s or something, that was the most amount of rain that we received in that one day. So going back to this slide here and looking at a number of years from 2020 to 2017, we have seen that there are record-breaking number of rains every single year. Sometimes even within the same month. April 2017, we saw 2. 2019, which is last year, we saw 4 of those. So there's a significant chance that, at least 4 times a year that or 1 to 4 times a year, we're going to see a record-breaking storm. Also to note that the amount of rain, that's what they call the normal amount of rain, and what we are seeing has, it does fluctuate, but a lot of times we are seeing more rain. So 2019, the normal was supposed to be about 40 inches of rain, and we received 53 inches. So it is, we are receiving a lot more rain. I did go back to the past 10 years between 2 particular months that we see a lot of rain, being April and August. So the orange line here is the normal precipitation. So they say usually in August you could expect to see around, I think it was around like 2.9 or almost 3 inches of rain in that month. A lot of these months have been well over. I mean, there are some that are well under the normal, but a lot of these months are also well over. So in looking at the actual perceived or what was observed, a new trend line, we calculated a new trend line to show what would actually be the median line from the last 10 years. And look at this line. I mean, it's just extending higher and higher and more farther away than the normal. With April, the trend line has actually started, the start of the decade was a little bit, it was a little bit higher, then it came a little bit lower, but still, I mean, it's a good 2 inches above what is normal. So, what we can expect as normal is, I don't know how the National Weather Service changes these things, or when they do, it's probably not on anyone's radar or high on their priority list, but these numbers are going substantially up. And I'll go back to with the frequency of rain, the other problem. So January also, we had a extreme weather event. I guess it was really, I took off the weather of the temperature on here, but it was a pretty warm day that January. And we had over 2 inches of rain on a January day, which is also a extreme precipitation event, but it also set the record. So January 10th, 2020, for the last 110, 120, or 130 years, that was the record storm that day of 2.1 to 6 inches of rain. Furthermore, these different boxes, the colors just indicate, they're different, because if I talk about a year, they're just different because of, signify a year. But what also is the issue is that you will have a rain, you'll have a little bit of rain one day, and then that kind of soaks into the ground, or the ground gets saturated, and then you will be followed up by a pretty heavy, really heavy storm, and then a pretty heavy storm again. So that's apparent. Like in April 2020, you started off with a really small storm one day, and then two pretty decent storms, and then one pretty heavy storm 2 days later, followed by a really big downpour. So at the point of the downpour, the ground saturated, the river levels might have been a little bit higher because of the days prior, but these storms, this storm on its own would be bad, but it doesn't help when you had days that were just adding a lot of water. And in May, when developers talk about there was no day that was dry, you can kind of see that's kind of true, where you have just a bunch of rain going. And with that, staff would say that's really one to kick this stormwater topic off with water, that there are things that we can do to kind of impact weather on a citywide scale. The more trees you have, the less concrete you have, that adds to the temperature of the atmosphere. That does affect the weather and rain, but a lot of those things we can control. But at the same time, if Kansas City or Springfield, Missouri are paving over things and cutting down trees, that does affect weather here as well. So there are things that we can do, sort of, but there are things that are out of our control, all besides setting a little bit better policies. Mr. Saunders, you mentioned the amount of getting rid of trees and the amount of parking that we have. Yeah, if there's a national standard that came into place that it's okay to have all these expansive parking. That's what the nation follows nowadays. So even, down in the city of St. Louis, when you're building new buildings, you're getting rid of 5 of these, densely built buildings, and you're putting a parking lot in a downtown area. It almost looks suburban sometimes. So as that's the style nowadays, that will probably only contribute to the rain intensifying. So the next couple weeks, going back to the other topics, we will, we'll see how some of these actually, like I just mentioned, loss of vegetation equals, what's called the heat or urban island effect, where you raise the temperature up. If you ever went to Six Flags and you're on that asphalt, that's a lot more heat than if you were on grass or something. So, but we'll get to those in the next few weeks. And Chairman, that's all I have for this evening for us to stormwater.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question on his chart. What does the letter T? I've looked all over that chart. I looked in the document we have. No, go to the green one for all the years. All the years totals.
Oh, that's a trace amount.
Okay.
The trace amount is what it mentioned.
Okay. That T stands for trace amount. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great, though. That was very informative and scary at the same time.
Chairman, what I ask as we look at one of these, this is a primary component that contributes to a lot of our stormwater management problems, is weather. And while we don't have the ability to control weather, we have to look at it in terms of what it tells us and what policies we can do, kind of like what Jonathan talked about. But there are other things too, in each of these past 2 or past 3 rain events back in May and the one in August, if you're part of the code red system, you receive that notification of a flash flood warning. And in most cases, the way I kind of think of it is, well, I don't live by a creek, so it doesn't impact me. But what it does, and what we've seen, is that there are certain areas that get inundated with rain, or we know specific properties are going to call the following day regarding an issue or a basement or so. That, the goal here is to look at what are actions that we can put in place to help us better manage, stormwater. And it may be something as simple as, instead of that code red saying flash flood, that it's specific areas noting that if you live in this specific part of Olivet, being a little bit more specific, to understand, you're gonna get some flooding, or provide some advice, especially as we have these detentions systems. If we get, these back-to-back rain events in the month of August, those systems are going to be full, and we're starting to learn and starting to have some of these systems starting to become mature, that there are things we need to start looking at and understanding to see how stormwater impacts those and such. So again, it's looking at these. We know it's a contributor. We know within our sphere of influence, it's not something that we can change, but we can set actions that eventually hopefully would lead to change. But two, what is it we can do to help our residents, be better prepared, in there. We don't know that the rain event is going to have a specific amount, but are there ways that we can be more proactive to get the word out, or, make sure that, inlets are cleared, or some, a priority of go and look at these inlets because we know they always clog up, or things like that. And that's what the goal of this plan is to put in place, something that provides, some direction of how we can better manage, stormwater, whether it's something we can influence or just things that we could be prepared, because we don't have the ability to change.
Well, this sounds like a great article for the, the community newsletter, even addressing each one of these items, and just kind of discussing some of these points, and then mentioning some issues that could be done to help communicate that.
Jonathan, I just want to mention also that stormwater is a huge issue in my neighborhood. And my neighbors and I have been trying to figure out why it's become a major issue amongst us. And I think you've helped answer that question as to why we're now facing this issue to the degree we are.
It really has increased.
And especially because it seems like the construction always gets blamed for it, but obviously this helps show that it's not just construction, it's everything else that's going on. Okay, well, I think we're done with that, unless there's anybody else that wants to have anything further.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to be the devil in the details.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, Jonathan has shown that we've had a lot more rain, and historically what's going on, I'm going to go back to why you say construction is not the main cause of it. I'm going to go back to construction again. I'm going to take off my political hat, and I'm going to become that citizen again. And I'm going to say, while we are building larger homes, what I have learned is, as a result of that, they need to dig deeper into the ground for the basement. And as a result, what one house had next to it for many, many years is now a house that I would call mounding. And that contributes to how water flows and how it goes. And that to me still has to be taken into consideration. I am not an expert by no means, and I'm grateful that, Olivet is going to this extreme to really attempt to look at and implement things that would mitigate this problem. But to me, in my 20 years, the complaints I get are the complaints from homeowners who have been here for 20 and 30 years, having to deal with new construction that is being built around them, next to them, behind them. So, I just have to say that's what I hear about water runoff.
And I apologize for misconstruing. I mean, there's definitely construction issues that could be addressed by that, but there is just a larger volume of water that, regardless of what issues, that water's got to go somewhere. And, there is a distinct change that's going on that we're experiencing, throughout the neighborhoods that would have existed if there wasn't any construction. construction could contribute. But you know, I think there is another aspect. If there wasn't any construction, we might still have issues.
I totally agree. And our MSD and our sewer system and how things were with the community that we are and how things got built without better infrastructure when those subdivisions were being built, that's an impact too. So I agree.
Okay, so let's move on to other business. I believe that we've received two sets of meeting minutes, one from August 6, 2020, and the other one from August 20th, 2020. Let's take
Chairman?
yeah, go ahead, Carol.
I'd like to acknowledge receipt of the meeting minutes for August 6, 2020 and for August 20, 2020.
Thank you for that. Okay. I don't believe we have to have a vote, so let's move on to reports. Carlos?
Chairman, note you have the schedule of dates for the council and the commission on that slide, so I'm not going to go through them specifically. COVID updates, of course, we still have a mandatory mask policy. There is discussion regarding the parks and reopening the playground equipment. I don't believe that's taken place yet on a council liaison, if she knows more on that, but I know that there is discussion about getting the play equipment open. And then we will host our first municipal court since, I believe, February, September 9th. That will be done virtual. September Zoom with the mayor is the schedule is an invite to County Prosecutor Wesley Bell. I don't believe that the date or there's been confirmation that Mr. Bell will be there, but I know an invite's been extended and they're trying to get that coordinated. Jonathan will be hosting one in November with a representative from the Missouri Botanical Gardens regarding rain gardens. I'll let Jonathan talk about that as soon as I go through the list here. And again, that will be for November. Regarding all of that, police department and fire, the police department is doing a community camera registration. There will be information in this upcoming newsletter that gets released in a couple of weeks. The police department's also, published its department policies available on our website. There will be some information in the community newsletter coming out in a couple of weeks. And then today, both police and fire hosted a Battle of the Badges blood drive. It was pretty busy throughout the day here in the community center. And it's been a while that we've had, noise and crowds going through. And so it was kind of nice today to have, I don't want to call it a distraction, but to have activity going on because it's been pretty quiet for the most part. Parks and recreation, again, there is a soccer clinic that is being put together by Parks and Recreation Department. As of today, they had a little bit over 100 kids that have registered for the soccer clinics. September 25th was supposed to be an outdoor movie that is being canceled, and they're looking to reschedule that in an October date. Work on Dealman Road has begun. I haven't driven by just to stay off from the traffic, but I believe that there are some closures, and probably by mid to late September, there will be a full closure once the culvert, or what they call it, references the bridge, is repaired. That will close off access. Again, we are still doing the 2020 census. I didn't have an opportunity to update those numbers. But again, all of that has been far ahead of the county and the state as a whole. Regarding developments, MSD continues working at the I-170 Gateway development, which is now known as Olive Crossing. And they're anticipated to continue work through the months of September and into October. The city center redevelopment area, we've issued the building permit for the garage construction, and the building permit itself for the apartments has been completed and ready for pickup for the developer. And I do have those landscape plans that I'll bring. I have to get those scheduled on one of these agendas in there for the commission to review. Centennial Greenway community meetings are ongoing. There was a grant application that was submitted for some funding, and they're working on final design. Everything is going smoothly up to this part, but as negotiations for property and access, there will be some hiccups, and it'll get a little slower on there. We've been in contact with representatives of Easy Storage regarding the progress on the site. They're working with us, and hopefully we'll have some more updates in the coming months. Regarding the Firestone, which is the southeast corner of Dealman and Olive, we've completed the review of the building permits. We just can't issue those until MSD has completed their reviews and they close on the site. Right now, it's just still under contract. So they just wanted to get the permitting process complete and some type of confidence that the closures that the permits would be issued before they closed on the site grounds on there. So we anticipate that step will be starting next. Plant Haven, we are reviewing the revisions for that from the building department right now. So that's still ongoing review. And I think that covers all the items I had on that slide. And if there's any other questions, I'll be glad to answer.
No, I think we can hear from Jonathan now.
Yep. And we have Robert Kennedy. He's with the Missouri Botanical Garden. He's the rainscaping coordinator. So with all of the, he does a lot of the programs. He works with the Deer Creek Watershed Alliance. If you ever heard us speak about them, he works closely with them. And also the Earth Waste Center, which is a branch of the Missouri Botanical Garden. So he will talk on just a high level of rainscaping and possibly if there's grant opportunities out there. So of course Deer Creek's out there, but if there are any other ones. And on a very high level, what you could probably do with your yard, what are resources. They even have a lot of examples at the Missouri Botanical Garden for that as well. So that would be our November the I believe it's November the 10th, which is Tuesday morning for that.
Sounds good. All right, Missy?
Mr. Trejo does a wonderful job. I don't have anything additional to add. I just want to make sure I heard something correctly. Is the Firestone deal and George's property that has been closed and that is a done deal, or we're still waiting for the permit process to appease the potential buyer?
No, we're waiting. Our permit review is complete. We just can't issue it until they show proof of ownership.
All right. All right, so that's moving forward. Okay, thanks. All right, as usual, thank you all for your time and consideration on this most important board.
All right, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will close the meeting at 10:04. Sorry for so long, guys. We got to figure out ways to make it faster.
Have a nice night, everybody.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Good night. See you later.
Right.